There might be something seriously off about the way we've been taught to see the history of the Americas. It's not that everything we've learned is completely wrong. It's more about what we were never told, the silent pieces, the overlooked traces, the mysteries that were never really closed. For centuries, ancient America has been painted as a wild, isolated land that only became civilized when Europeans arrived. But what if that's just the tip of the iceberg? What if the civilizations that once lived here had knowledge, technologies, and complex social systems we still can't fully explain today? Could it be that the history we think we know is just a thin chapter from a much bigger, hidden story? Even timelines we thought were set in stone, like the idea that Homo sapiens only arrived in the Americas around 13,000 years ago via the Bering Land Bridge, are starting to crack. Strange archaeological finds buried deep beneath South America's soil, forgotten stone ruins hidden in the Amazon rainforest, and deserts in Mexico are turning up fossilized footprints, stone tools, and ancient architecture that point to a much more advanced level of organization than classical history ever allowed. These discoveries don't just challenge the dates. We're starting to see signs of lost, prehistoric civilizations that vanished without a trace, leaving behind only silent ruins and unanswered questions. The story of ancient America didn't begin with the Maya, the Inca, or the Aztec. It may go back much, much further, beyond the timelines that traditional archaeology has accepted. It may have been shaped by nameless civilizations, buried by time, swallowed by jungle and sand, and erased by ideology. From cities overtaken by the Amazon to pyramids hidden beneath desert dunes, from mysterious symbols carved into stone to massive underground systems, we're left with whispers from the past that quietly ask us, how much do we really know about the history of the Americas? And with that, Bedtime History invites you to enter a story that refuses to stop flowing, a place where historical truth isn't handed to you, but something you must seek out. So the real question is, are you ready to see the Americas with a completely new set of eyes? Not the version you were taught in school, but the one you were never allowed to believe could be real. If most of what we believe about ancient American history is built on so-called official timelines, then it's the unexpected discoveries, the ones that don't quite fit, that are quietly shaking the foundations of that illusion. There's a truth we can't ignore, the so-called exceptions, the artifacts that don't match the approved timeline, are starting to become the strongest evidence that the past was far more complex than we thought. From deep layers of earth to towering rock walls, researchers keep uncovering objects whose age directly contradicts the history we've been taught. And every one of these findings feels like a soft but firm knock on the door of denial, forcing us to ask, is the past beginning to reveal a different version of itself, one that's been hidden away? Take Monte Verde in Chile, an archaeological site that sent shockwaves through the academic world in the late 20th century. There, scientists uncovered evidence of a settlement dating back over 18,000 years, at least 5,000 years earlier than the widely accepted Bering Strait migration theory. And we're not just talking about a few fire pits or stone tools. They found remains of houses, food, even twisted plant fibers used for tying things together, clear signs of a developed, settled lifestyle. Monteverde didn't just break the timeline, it raised deeper questions. If people were living that far south in the Americas so early, how did they get there? What route did they take, and how long had they been here before that? Then there's Pedra Furada in Brazil, where archaeologists have found stone flakes that many independent researchers believe were shaped by human hands. The problem? Some of these tools date back 32,000 years. In fact, a number of samples were dismissed outright, not because they lacked evidence, but because they were just too old to be believable. That rejection didn't come from weak data, it came from a stubborn mindset, the belief that humans simply couldn't have been in the Americas that far back. But isn't real science supposed to follow the evidence, even if it threatens our current theories? And then there are the footprints, arguably the clearest sign that people were here. At White Sands, New Mexico, researchers discovered hundreds of fossilized human footprints dated by radiocarbon testing to between 21,000 and 23,000 years ago. These prints are embedded in ancient sediment, right alongside tracks of Ice Age animals like mammoths and giant ground sloths. And this isn't just one isolated print, it's a trail, a sequence of human movement, like a group walking across soft earth, only to be buried by time and now slowly returning to the light. If we're willing to look at these findings without bias, they force us to rewrite the opening chapter of human history in the Americas. Not only do we have to push back the date of arrival, we also have to rethink their capabilities. How were they organized? How did they travel? And is it possible they belong to civilizations we've never even heard of? Artifacts like spear tips, pottery shards, even metal tools have been found buried so deep that they don't match any known period of confirmed civilization. And often these objects aren't discarded because they lack evidence. They're dismissed because they're just too inconvenient to explain using traditional models. History, like a river, always finds a way to push through the dams of old assumptions. And those silent objects, buried in the earth, locked in stone, or hidden deep in the forest, are slowly steering that current back on course. But to see it, we need the courage to redraw the entire mental map we've trusted for so long, because if the timeline was already wrong at the starting point, then how much else about ancient American history can we truly say is accurate? And that's just the surface. If we keep digging, not just into the ground, but into our collective memory, we'll find that even the methods we trust to date the past, like radiocarbon dating, are full of unanswered questions. And from there, a new layer of mystery begins to emerge, one that leads us into the next chapter: the secrets behind carbon dating and the controversies it still carries today. When it comes to figuring out the age of an artifact or an ancient site, radiocarbon dating is often seen as the gold standard, the ultimate clock of archaeology. But here's the twist: that very method, once hailed as foolproof, is now at the center of controversy and rejection. Our blind faith in an imperfect tool has, in some cases, become a locked door, shutting out possibilities that should have been explored. Carbon-14 doesn't lie, but the way we interpret it can be adjusted, distorted, or, let's be honest, cherry-picked to fit the narrative. Carbon-14, also known as radiocarbon dating, measures the remaining radioactive carbon in organic material to estimate how long it's been since that organism died. But the method only works under certain conditions. The material needs to be uncontaminated, free from environmental disruption, untouched by geological activity, and most importantly, it assumes that the level of carbon-14 in the atmosphere has always stayed consistent over time. But in reality, that's not how nature works. Things like cosmic radiation, volcanic eruptions, even major natural disasters can shift atmospheric carbon levels dramatically, throwing off results by thousands of years without anyone realizing. One of the most famous examples is the heated debate over charred wood fragments found deep in an excavation layer at Valsequillo, Mexico. The first round of radiocarbon testing dated the samples at an unbelievable 250,000 years old, an age completely incompatible with the accepted timeline of human presence in the Americas. That result was immediately dismissed as contamination, or measurement error, despite no solid evidence to support those claims. The wood was shelved, and the excavation was shut down soon after, not because it lacked value, but because that value didn't fit inside the academic box. At Pedra Furada, mentioned earlier, a series of stone artifacts were found buried in ancient layers that could date back over 32,000 years. But since radiocarbon dating couldn't be reliably applied due to the lack of suitable organic material, conservative archaeologists simply brushed the findings aside, claiming the stones were naturally rounded by water and wind, not shaped by human hands. The rejection didn't come from contradictory evidence, it came from a method that couldn't be applied neatly. That's a problem worth pausing on. Even stranger in some cases, samples taken just inches apart at the same site have come back with age estimates that differ by tens of thousands of years. This doesn't just raise questions about accuracy, it casts doubt on how consistently the data is being interpreted. Is it possible that this ambiguity is being swept under the rug just to keep history from getting too messy? There's also a little-known fact: many dating labs quietly refuse to process samples that are too old for the archaeological context they were found in. This isn't a technical limitation, it's a soft form of censorship where data is only accepted if it aligns with expectations. One archaeologist even admitted he had to report a different location for an artifact just to get it tested, because the real location would have caused it to be rejected outright. If science starts filtering data based on belief instead of evidence, what happens to history? The real danger isn't that carbon-14 is wrong, it's that we treat it like it can never be wrong. When a dating tool becomes a barrier to open thinking, history ends up trapped in the shadow of its own assumptions. And when artifacts are dismissed, not because they're fake, but simply because their age makes people uncomfortable, we lose the chance to better understand the human story. All these controversies only reinforce a deeper truth. History is never set in stone. It's a living, shifting current shaped by the way we read the traces left behind. And when those traces include ancient footprints pressed into long-forgotten earth or nameless tools buried in frozen soil, what we need isn't more skepticism, it's a willingness to truly listen. Sometimes getting closer to the truth doesn't require a new method. It just takes a new mindset, one that dares to believe in what might be possible instead of settling for what's already familiar. And it's that mindset that will lead us to the next step, toward undeniable traces of early human life etched into stone and soil like diary pages from an era we've never truly read the right way. Buried deep in the silent layers of earth, where time piles up grain by grain, invisible and patient, are traces we can't ignore. They're not printed in textbooks, but they exist, like whispers from the past. Fossilized footprints, forgotten stone tools, strange nameless structures, they all seem to invite us to look at the history of the Americas through a different lens, one free from assumptions. In a world where dating methods are still debated, these physical, tangible clues may be the most powerful proof we have that humans arrived here much earlier than we ever imagined. At White Sands, New Mexico, hundreds of ancient human footprints lie preserved in the Ice Age soil, layered alongside the tracks of mammoths, giant ground sloths, and extinct birds. What stunned researchers wasn't just the prints themselves, but the story they seemed to tell. Children running, adults carrying toddlers, footsteps pressed deep into the ground as if people were moving quickly, crossing wet terrain thousands of years ago. Radiocarbon testing of the seed layers above and below the footprints dated them to somewhere between 21,000 and 23,000 years ago, a number that blows past every prior theory about when humans first set foot in the Americas. And it's not just there. In Nevada's famous Lovelock Cave, archaeologists uncovered stone tools, leather shoes, and signs of daily life, some artifacts possibly over 10,000 years old. Reports once mentioned human bones with unusually shaped skulls, but those samples mysteriously disappeared from public records without explanation. Some have even suggested that a race of giants once lived there, though that idea was quickly labelled native legend and dismissed. Still, the presence of finely woven baskets, obsidian arrowheads, and well-crafted blades suggests a technical skill that's hard to write off. Then there's the Topper site in South Carolina, where tools were found buried far deeper than the Clovis layer. Clovis being the culture long thought to represent the earliest people in the Americas, dating back around 13,000 years. But if the deeper tools really were made by human hands, that could mean pre-Clovis people were living there between 16,000 and 20,000 years ago, maybe even earlier. Instead of being embraced as a scientific breakthrough, though, these discoveries were met with skepticism, pushback, even outright rejection, simply because they didn't fit the existing framework. At Galt, Texas, a site once thought to contain only Clovis-era tools, recent studies uncovered an even older cultural layer beneath. There, researchers found stone tools crafted with unique, refined techniques, possibly dating back over 20,000 years. Among them were thin blades, scrapers, and carefully shaped fluted points, evidence of a level of craftsmanship and organization that challenges the idea of early humans as merely primitive hunters. These traces can't just be brushed off as coincidence or error. They exist in form, in structure, and in silent message. Ancient humans were here far earlier than we thought. And maybe they weren't isolated bands of survivors, but part of organized communities with social order, technology, and even belief systems of their own. Stone tools, remnants of dwellings, fire pits, even carved pillars with geometric symbols, all suggest that abstract thinking, the very core of civilization, wasn't something that arrived late. It may have been here all along. So what happened to those foundations? Were they wiped out by natural catastrophe, a great flood, a climate shift, or simply swallowed by time and buried under layers of forgetfulness? Or worse, were they deliberately erased, pushed out of history because acknowledging a past so distant, so unfamiliar, would threaten to collapse everything we thought we knew? Whatever the reason, what still lies underground, the faint footprints, the sharp tools, the quiet layers of ash, continue to whisper one thing: the past doesn't rest. And if we're brave enough to dig deeper, not just with shovels, but with honest curiosity, we may come closer to discovering civilizations that don't yet have names. From there, the story begins to shift toward one of the first true cities of ancient America, Corral. A place that may echo with the very first signs of a civilization that once shined brightly in the darkness of prehistory. In the dry, sun-baked lands of the Super Valley, just north of Lima, Peru, there's a place that doesn't quite fit our usual sense of time. Corral, an ancient city built over 5,000 years ago, stunned the archaeological world when it was discovered and confirmed as one of the oldest known urban settlements, not just in the Americas, but on Earth. While the Egyptians were beginning to build pyramids and the Sumerians were first inventing writing, the people of Corral were already constructing a massive stone city, complete with intricate architecture, stepped pyramids, central plazas, and a stunningly organized society. No evidence of war, no fortresses, no weapons. Instead, archaeologists found musical instruments, signs of trade, and structures that reflect a culture centered on harmony, knowledge, and peace. Corral isn't a city pulled from legend or myth. It came to light thanks to the persistence of Peruvian archaeologist Ruth Shady. For years, she and her small team slowly unearthed what looked like simple mounds of dirt, until they revealed a sprawling urban complex dating back to around 2600 BCE. That's as old, or even older, than Egypt and Mesopotamia's earliest civilizations. But what makes Corral truly special isn't just its age, It's the sheer level of planning and the spiritual symbolism embedded in its design. The pyramids were reinforced with mesh-like layers of stone to withstand earthquakes, using a technique that modern architecture still relies on today. The city's circular plaza, used for public ceremonies, was engineered with surprisingly advanced geometry and acoustics. Inside these structures, researchers discovered flutes made of bird bones, ceramic whistles, drums, and conch shell trumpets, proof that music was a central part of Karal's spiritual and social life. No signs of warfare, no weapons, no defense walls, just peaceful innovation and vibrant culture. Roads connected Karal to far-off regions, hinting at a vast trade network that may have stretched to the Pacific coast and deep into the Andes, but Karal presents a riddle we haven't been able to fully answer. How did a prehistoric society with no metal tools, no wheels, and no written language manage to organize and build a city of such scale? How did they grasp physics and geometry well enough to create structures that have stood for millennia? And why did their legacy seem to fade, leaving so little behind for later civilizations to build upon? Could it be that Karal wasn't the beginning, but a remnant, a surviving echo of an even earlier phase of human advancement, one we haven't yet named? One of the most mysterious aspects is the presence of abstract and cosmological symbols. On walls and structures, researchers found spirals, circles, and alignments that point directly to the rising and setting of the sun throughout the year. These aren't random decorations. They're deeply woven into a worldview where humans weren't separate from the cosmos, but part of it. Sacred, even. Karal feels like a memory awakened from the earth, reclaiming its place in the story of humanity. But its true importance doesn't lie only in how early it appears on the timeline. It lies in the way it forces us to ask harder questions. Were the first civilizations really the result of slow, linear development? Or are they the leftovers of something that once peaked and then quietly disappeared? Karal doesn't give us a final answer, but it does shake the foundations of everything we thought we knew. If Karal can be seen as the opening chapter of urban history in the Americas, then the Olmec are the first vivid memory of a civilization so rich in symbolism that even modern language seems too quiet to describe it. Along the lush, swampy lands of the Gulf of Mexico, what is now Veracruz and Tabasco, lie the remains of a mysterious society that rose to greatness, then vanished like a ghost swallowed by the jungle. The name Olmec, given by modern archaeologists, means rubber people. But it's the traces they left behind that truly force history to take a second look. The Olmec left behind no written chronicles, no carved timelines. But they did leave something more powerful: colossal stone heads weighing tens of tons carved into majestic faces, serene, distant, and uncannily unfamiliar. Some believe these heads represent rulers, others think they're gods, and still others suggest they may be portraits of people from elsewhere, perhaps even across the ocean. Whatever the truth may be, one thing is clear: the Olmec had the ability to extract, transport, and sculpt massive basalt boulders, some weighing up to 50 tons, from quarries dozens of miles away, all without the wheel, without draft animals, without metal tools. This isn't just a question of technology, it's a question of organization, vision, and a mindset far beyond the limits of their time. But sculpture was just one part of it. The Olmec laid the cultural groundwork for later Mesoamerican civilizations like the Maya and the Aztec, from early symbolic writing to ritual sacrifice to the very structure of their theocratic societies. Ancient stone carvings like Leventa Stela III or the Cascajal block contain markings that may be the earliest known form of writing in the Americas. If that's true, then the Olmec weren't just the mother culture. They were the first storytellers, recording consciousness in symbols and preserving memory in abstract language. What stands out even more is the deeply symbolic, cosmological worldview embedded in their society. Many of their buildings align with celestial axes pointing toward solstices or astronomical events. Their religion centered around the feathered serpent, the jaguar god, and deities of water and fertility, symbols that lived on for centuries in other cultures, as though the Olmec had created a sacred blueprint for all of Mesoamerica. Inside their pyramids of earth and stone, archaeologists have found small statues with otherworldly human features, elongated heads, almond eyes, tiny mouths, as if they were never meant to represent ordinary people. Their economy, too, shows impressive complexity. Canal systems, levees, storage facilities, and ceremonial roads that connected major centers like San Lorenzo, La Venta, and Tres Zapotes. These weren't just places to live, they were hubs of spiritual and cosmic power. And it makes you wonder who taught them how to do all this. How did they develop such advanced social structures when neighboring areas were still living nomadic lives? The answer might lie in something we've lost, a deeper origin, or a memory erased from history. Some modern scholars suggest the Olmec weren't the beginning at all, but the final echo of something much older. A string of civilizations now mostly vanished, leaving only scattered traces behind. The stone heads, with their unplaceable faces, might be portraits of those who once lit the spark, then faded into legend, leaving behind descendants and distorted remnants. Others point to similarities between Olmec astronomy and ancient Eastern traditions, raising the possibility of transoceanic contact long before Columbus, a theory traditional archaeology calls fringe, yet one that's quietly gaining circumstantial support. Whatever the truth may be, the Olmec still stand as a challenge. No confirmed name, no preserved history, no clear successor. And yet their influence ripples thousands of years forward, like an anonymous teacher who left behind a curriculum but never signed their name. When we stand before those stone heads, we can't help but feel that something once existed, something greater, something aware, something that knew exactly who it was, but chose to retreat into the shadows of history. Still, one unmistakable symbol remains: those massive stone faces, silent, staring, unmoving. And maybe, just maybe, they hold the key to the true origin of a civilization that once lit up the prehistoric darkness of the Americas. They stand there, silent, unmoving, deep in the humid jungles of Mesoamerica, like eternal witnesses to a time that passed without saying goodbye. 20 colossal basalt heads, each standing between 5 and nearly 10 feet tall, weighing on average more than 20 tons, some over 50, are the most iconic legacy of the Olmec civilization and one of the greatest archaeological mysteries in the Americas. It's not just their size or weight that stuns people, it's what they represent, faces that don't resemble any known indigenous group, carved with such precision and expression that they blur the line between ancient art and something more profound. These heads, often found at major ceremonial centers like San Lorenzo, La Venta, and Tres Zapotes, all share a powerful presence: broad jaws, wide noses, thick lips, and eyes that seem to pierce straight through time. Some scholars believe they depict revered rulers, immortalized in stone to preserve their authority. But if they're just portraits of leaders, why were they buried? Why were many of them found face down in the earth, intentionally hidden, as if part of some ritual meant to return them to the ground? One compelling theory, proposed by several independent researchers, suggests these are more than portraits. They might be symbols of a people who once existed, possibly the originators of the Olmec civilization. The facial features, often described as having distinctly African characteristics, have led some scholars to wonder if there were transoceanic contacts from Africa or other distant regions thousands of years before Columbus. Mainstream archaeology still rejects this idea for lack of strong evidence, but when you're standing face to face with these stone giants, that rejection feels less about science and more about discomfort, with both emotion and logic. Others go even further, saying these heads are materialized memory, not just to honor the past, but to preserve a kind of knowledge. A message to the future that something extraordinary once happened here. If that's true, then these sculptures aren't just monuments, they're spiritual markers, like the Moai statues of Easter Island or the stone pillars of Göbekli Tepe. They weren't built for shelter, they were built to say something that words couldn't express. But how did the Olmec manage to move and carve such massive stones when the basalt quarries were located miles away through swampy terrain, with no wheels, no draft animals, and no metal tools? One theory suggests they floated the stones down rivers on wooden rafts, but that still doesn't explain how they got them down from the mountains or stood them upright without pulleys or advanced levers. Could it be that they possessed some kind of technical knowledge we've yet to understand, or perhaps they weren't alone? Some of the heads also bear strange markings, possible hieroglyphs, astronomical symbols, or swirling lines, motifs that would later appear in Maya culture. Could the Olmec have been not only material ancestors, but the symbolic origin of all Central American visual language? And if these heads were part of a kind of stone library, can we decipher something from their gaze, their placement, or the rituals that once happened around them? And here's the fascinating part. No two heads are exactly the same. Each one is unique, with different expressions, sizes, and headdresses. That adds weight to the theory that they're portraits of real individuals, but it could also suggest a coded system, marking social rank, spiritual roles, or even ethnic origin. Maybe what we're looking at are the stone ID cards of a forgotten people, lost to time but not to memory. Like all great mysteries, the Olmec heads offer no clear answer. They are the faces of the past, but also a mirror reflecting our present confusion, where modern science still doesn't have the full vocabulary to decode what the ancients left behind. And when we finally turn our gaze away from those stone eyes, what lingers isn't certainty. It's the deep sense that we've just glimpsed something very real, something that's been forgotten for far too long. If the metaphysical carvings of the Olmec still leave scientists puzzled and skeptical, then what remains at Tiwanaku, sitting quietly on the shores of Lake Titicaca at nearly 13,000 feet above sea level, pushes those boundaries even further. Tiwanaku isn't just an ancient ruin, it's often seen as the spiritual cradle of Andean civilizations, where enormous stone blocks were fitted together with such precision that even modern engineering struggles to explain how it was done. Each stone looks as though it was pre-cast and laser-cut, using technology that official history doesn't even acknowledge existed in prehistoric times. The stones at Tiwanaku aren't just massive, they're carved, notched, and interlocked with such exactness that even today's engineers argue over how it was possible. The andesite and diorite blocks, rocks harder than steel, were stacked with tight, complex joins using no mortar, no gaps, and yet have stood firm for thousands of years. At Pumapunku, an eerie extension of the main site, you'll find giant H-shaped blocks machined with near-mechanical accuracy, perfectly round boreholes, and razor-sharp corners cut at flawless right angles. It looks less like something chipped by hand and more like it came off a modern CNC machine. How did an ancient people, without wheels, without metal, without rotary tools, manipulate such stone with this kind of precision? The mainstream answers are often evasive. They were very skilled, or they had a lot of time. But anyone who's stood in front of those stones knows it's not just about craftsmanship. It's about a different kind of thinking, a different level of technology, and maybe even a different kind of purpose. These weren't built just for shelter, they were built with intention, astronomical, spiritual, possibly even something beyond conventional understanding. Many of the structures at Tiwanaku are aligned with precision to the cardinal directions and solstice points. Ceremonial platforms like Kalasasaya functioned as giant solar calendars, where the shadows of stone pillars would land exactly on key dates in the solar year. This means the builders weren't just casually observing the sky, they deeply understood the motion of the cosmos. For a prehistoric culture, living in a harsh, high-altitude environment, to design architecture in perfect harmony with the universe, that's not an accident. But the mystery doesn't stop there. Some theories suggest Tiwanaku might once have been a port city, complete with stone docks that still bear marks of water erosion. The strange part? Lake Titicaca's shoreline today lies miles away, and the elevation has changed significantly. If that theory is correct, then either the geography and water levels of the region have shifted dramatically since then, or Tiwanaku was built long, long ago, possibly even before the end of the last ice age. Some independent researchers drawing on geological and astronomical data suggest the site could be up to 15,000 years old or more. Mainstream archaeology rejects this outright, of course, but even so, there's something about Tiwanaku that refuses to fit neatly into the official 1,500-year timeline printed in textbooks. The scarier question is, if Tiwanaku really is that ancient, who built it? The Tiwanaku people themselves? Or were they simply inheritors, living among the ruins of something far older, reinterpreting its meaning through a new cultural lens? This pattern has happened throughout history. The Maya arrived at El Mirador, the Inca at Sacsayhuaman, the Greeks at Knossos. In each case, new generations added their own meaning, covering up the true origins buried beneath their feet. At Tiwanaku, the stones aren't just building material, they are thought forms, maps of a lost world view, possibly encoding a kind of forgotten knowledge of materials, of sound resonance, of solar energy, of harmony between structure and sky. When you stand in Tiwanaku, you're not just visiting an ancient city, you're standing in a prehistoric archive, one written not in letters, but in stone. If Tiwanaku was a civilization's bold declaration of cosmic knowledge and social order, then Pumapunku is its eerie whisper, a haunting reminder of a technology that once existed and was somehow lost. Just a few hundred meters from the heart of Tiwanaku, this site isn't massive, it doesn't have towering monuments or ornate temples, but it stops engineers, archaeologists, and even skeptics in their tracks. They look at the stones scattered across the high Andean plateau and ask in hushed disbelief, who created this and how? Pumapunku, which in Aymara means the gate of the puma or the lion's gate, is a field of broken basalt and diorite blocks lying seemingly at random, many shattered as if toppled by a great catastrophe. But what makes this site so strange isn't just the size of the stones, it's the way they were worked. These aren't rough-hewn rocks, they are perfectly geometric forms with flawless right angles, laser-flat surfaces, precisely centered boreholes, and grooves so accurate the stones could interlock like pieces of some ancient Lego set. Some of these stones weigh over 100 tons and were transported from quarries nearly 10 kilometers away. No wheels, no cranes, no draft animals, and all of this at high altitude in terrain that's brutally unforgiving. Even getting the stones there would be extraordinary, but carving and fitting them? That's what truly defies explanation. You see advanced techniques, dovetail joints, tongue and groove fittings, triangular notches, details so precise they resemble the kind of stonework only modern industrial tools can achieve. Engineers who have studied the site have admitted, we don't know how this could have been done with only stone tools. So the question becomes unavoidable. Did ancient people have access to a kind of technology that has since been lost? Something that doesn't fit into our slow, linear model of human development? Some independent researchers even suggest they might have known something about material science, sonic manipulation, or temporary stone softening techniques. These ideas are often dismissed as pseudoscience, not because they're disproven, but because they don't fit the mainstream narrative. The deeper you study Pumapunku, the more it starts to look like an engineering complex, not a religious temple. The famous H-shaped stones can be slotted together in multiple configurations, almost like modular components, a concept of architectural design that modern construction only began using in recent decades. Other clues like buried drainage channels, sunken pillars, and underground systems hint at some kind of hydraulic or mechanical function that once existed here and then vanished without explanation. Some have proposed that Pumapunku wasn't a temple at all, but a sort of stone laboratory, a place where ancient builders or engineers experimented with joint systems and architectural concepts, just like we use CAD software and 3D models today. The unfinished blocks, half-cut surfaces, and chaotic scattering of material, could they be evidence of a project abandoned midstream, halted by a catastrophe we don't yet understand? And then there are the myths, ancient oral histories that speak of a first age, when gods or enlightened ancestors traveled between cities in straight lines without vehicles, carrying tools that shaped stone as if it were soft clay. Today we dismiss these stories as legends, but when you stand before the stones of Pumapunku, it's hard not to shiver at the thought that maybe, just maybe, those stories were trying to preserve a truth, one so profound that it could only be recorded in stone, not in writing. Today, Pumapunku is just a pile of ruins. No one knows what it looked like when it stood intact. There are no domes, no blueprints, no epic poems describing it. And maybe that's what gives it power. It speaks without language, like an echo from a past that was never translated. When you leave the site, the question lingering in your mind isn't just, how did they do this? But something far more unsettling. Maybe we're not the first civilization that knew how to build. Maybe we're just the first to stop believing in things we don't yet understand. From the impossible engineering of Pumapunku, history leads us to the monumental achievements left behind by the Maya, massive pyramids, jungle-covered cities, and most striking of all, El Mirador, a once great capital that lay forgotten for thousands of years, not where the Maya story began, but where it was reborn. Hidden deep in the Petén jungle of northern Guatemala, where the trees grow so thick that sunlight barely touches the forest floor, lies a city that was once the most powerful center of the ancient Maya world. A city so thoroughly erased from memory that not a single legend, myth, or historical record from the Maya's descendants ever mentioned its name. El Mirador, the lookout, wasn't rediscovered through myth or ancient texts. It was uncovered by the silent roar of massive stone foundations buried beneath the jungle floor. Without satellite imagery and modern LiDAR scans, we might never have known that in the middle of this wild and uninhabited land once stood a city rivaling the scale and complexity of ancient Greece. El Mirador wasn't just a large city, it was an empire. From around the 6th century BCE to the 1st century CE, nearly a millennium before famous Maya sites like Tikal or Copan rose to power, El Mirador was the heart of a vast network of urban centers connected by massive man-made causeways called Sacbiob that stretched for miles across the dense rainforest. At its core were massive limestone pyramids rising like man-made mountains, none more impressive than La Danta, the tallest pyramid in all of ancient America. In sheer volume, it surpasses even the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan and even Egypt's Great Pyramid of Khufu. What makes El Mirador so mysterious isn't just the scale, it's the timing. While much of Mesoamerica was still in its early settlement phase, the people of El Mirador had already laid out a fully developed city with ceremonial axes, residential zones, central plazas, rainwater reservoirs, and even a sophisticated water management system. They used a construction technique that mixed lime with soil to prevent foundation sinking, perfectly adapted for the tropical forest environment and durable enough to last millennia. It reveals a level of geological knowledge, hydrological planning, and labor organization far beyond what scholars once thought possible for the pre-classic Maya period. And yet, El Mirador is missing from modern Maya cultural memory. No oral tradition speaks of it, no later documents mention it. An empire that ruled over 1 million people, that built titanic monuments, simply disappeared from history as if it had never existed. Was it some deep trauma that led the Maya to forget? Or was the collapse so swift, so absolute, that no one was left to remember? Some recent studies suggest that El Mirador may have collapsed under the weight of its own success. The intense use of forest resources to burn limestone for construction may have devastated the ecosystem, leading to soil degradation, water loss during dry seasons, and eventually agricultural and social collapse. Even under this grim scenario, the people of El Mirador emerge as brilliant architects of complexity, master astronomers, and priest bureaucrats with extraordinary organizational skills. Today, when archaeologists walk along the ancient Sac Biob, now hidden beneath tangled roots, they don't just see the ruins of a city, they see a blueprint of society pushed to its limits. El Mirador becomes a symbol not just of what the ancients could build, but what they could lose when ambition outpaces sustainability. But perhaps the most important thing is this: El Mirador wasn't isolated. Many of the mythological symbols, architectural designs, and religious rituals found here later reappeared at other Maya centers like Tikal, Calakmul, and Palenque. It suggests that even though the empire collapsed, its ideas survived, carried forward like an ember, passed from hand to hand, quiet, enduring. Maybe El Mirador didn't vanish. Maybe it just changed form, living on in the cultural DNA of the civilizations that came after. When we look at the bas-reliefs carved with feathered serpents, twin suns, jaguar gods, and the earliest depictions of Kukulkan at El Mirador, we realize these weren't sudden inventions. They were nurtured from a much older source, one that late classic Maya culture inherited and elevated. And to truly understand that, we have to dive into the heart of Maya writing and timekeeping, a system so complex, modern scholars are still decoding it, line by line, symbol by symbol, like peeling back the layers of a universe written in time. Within the intricately carved stones and faded reliefs of ancient Maya temples lies something more valuable than even their pyramids or grand cities: the language of time. The Maya didn't just leave behind ruins, they left behind a mind-bending writing system and a calendar so precise it still stuns modern scientists. Their hieroglyphic script was so complex that it took scholars decades just to crack the basics. And their multi-layered calendar, so accurate it outperforms the modern Gregorian calendar, proves that the Maya weren't just builders of temples and ritual sites. They were abstract thinkers, pure mathematicians, timekeepers of a cosmic order. But one big question still hangs in the air. Who was the first to shape this symbolic system, to encode the rhythm of the universe into language? The Maya writing system doesn't look like anything else in the Americas. It wasn't just phonetic, it was deeply symbolic. It didn't just represent syllables or sounds. Each glyph could hold meaning, carry a visual symbol, or even express a metaphysical idea. These glyphs, some of them eerily sophisticated from the very earliest stages, didn't evolve slowly over centuries. They appear from the start as if fully formed. That's raised a serious question among researchers. Were these signs really invented by the Maya themselves? Or were they inherited, passed down from an earlier civilization like El Mirador, or even the Olmec, where the first seeds of symbolic writing may have been planted? One of the most debated pieces of evidence is the Cascajal block, found in what was once Olmec territory, dating back to around 900 to 1000 BCE. On its surface are repeated symbols and what appears to be structured linear writing. Many scholars believe it could represent a proto-script, possibly the earliest writing system in the Americas. But because it doesn't fit neatly into the accepted timeline, it's often left out of mainstream history textbooks. If the Cascajal block truly is a precursor to Maya writing, then we'd have to push the history of American scripts back by at least 1,000 years, and writing was just part of it. The Maya also developed a stunningly advanced calendar system with 3 interlocking cycles: the 260-day ritual calendar called Tzolk'in, the 365-day solar calendar known as Harb, and the long count, a continuous count of days that begins at the creation moment of the current world age. The mind-blowing part: the solar calendar is accurate to within 0.0002 days of the actual solar year, more precise than what we use today. And their understanding of celestial motion, Venus cycles, eclipses, planetary alignments, was so detailed it still challenges modern astronomy. And they did it all without telescopes, without star charts, without modern equipment. So how did they do it? Some researchers believe they didn't start from scratch. They inherited astronomical knowledge that had been compiled and preserved long before, possibly from a now-forgotten culture, one that passed down its cosmic understanding through symbols, temples, and sacred geometry. That's why Maya glyphs don't just document events, they map the heavens. They record time not just in days and months, but in cosmic pulses, beats of the invisible universe. Surviving codices like the Dresden and Madrid Codex don't just record planting cycles or rituals. They predict eclipses, chart celestial events, and describe metaphysical moments linked to cycles spanning thousands of years. This wasn't the work of a superstitious people. It was the product of a holistic worldview, one where time wasn't linear but cyclical, where time connected the lives of humans, gods, nature, and the stars in one synchronized rhythm. So who was the first person to look up at the sky, see meaning in the stars, and decide to etch that meaning into stone, into bark paper, into temple walls? We don't know their name. We have no portrait of their face. But their fingerprints are everywhere. In the way the Maya wrote a day, a festival, a moon cycle, in how they aligned their temples to Venus, in how they believed the world doesn't end, it simply transforms. The Maya script and calendar, with all their astonishing complexity and systematic brilliance, weren't just tools of knowledge. They were symbols of collective memory, of a civilization's sacred desire to hold on to time, to treat it not as a passing thing, but as something divine. And beneath the surface of their civilization, the Maya left behind something even deeper: structures hidden underground, caves, tunnels, and silent doorways leading into the earth. Places where knowledge wasn't carved in stone, but stored in shadows, reserved only for those who truly understood. For the Maya, the underworld wasn't just a burial place, it was a gateway, a sacred bridge connecting the world of the living, the heavens and Xibalba, the mysterious realm of spirits and ancient gods. And it's directly beneath some of their most sacred structures, like El Castillo at Chichen Itza, or the temples at Palenque and Calakmul, that these hidden doorways began to reveal themselves. For decades, modern archaeologists believed Maya pyramids were strictly ceremonial, or used as astronomical observatories. But ground-penetrating radar surveys and recent underwater archaeological dives have uncovered something astonishing. Beneath many of these great pyramids lie natural sinkholes, limestone caves, and underground water chambers, cenotes. that were intentionally incorporated into the design. This wasn't random. The builders seemed to know exactly where the land opened up, where caves lay waiting, and how to align the temple's central axis directly with the mouth of these sacred wells. Was this how they created a cosmic axis, a place where ritual, astronomy, and myth all converged? One of the most shocking discoveries came at Chichen Itza. Beneath the El Castillo pyramid, researchers found a submerged limestone cave, essentially a dark well, formed by collapsed rock and filled with water. For the Maya, this was no ordinary cave. It was believed to be an entrance to Xibalba. The area had been sealed off for thousands of years, only exposed after 3D radar scanning revealed something undeniable. The pyramid was intentionally built atop a sacred geological convergence point. That couldn't be coincidence, the Maya knew. They chose that exact spot as the axis mundi, the central pillar between heaven and earth. And Chichen Itza wasn't the only one. At Palenque, researchers uncovered secret cave systems beneath the Temple of Inscriptions. When King Pakal's tomb was excavated, a carved stone channel was found running beneath his sarcophagus, possibly symbolizing the soul's passage to the other world. On the sarcophagus lid, Pakal is shown reclined, as if piloting a cosmic machine, surrounded by celestial symbols and astronomical references. Orthodox scholars say it's just spiritual metaphor, but there's a quiet, persistent sense that something deeper is being hinted at. Indigenous researchers believe these caves and sacred wells weren't just symbolic. They were the actual resting places of ancestral spirits and the vaults where sacred knowledge was stored. Not everyone could enter, only those entrusted to remember and protect the memory of the world. These chosen ones walked narrow stone corridors, passed through dark waters and echoed chambers, into sacred cavities where sound became music, and shafts of sunlight pierced the void only once a year, at the most sacred moment in the cosmic cycle. These passageways weren't haphazard mazes, they were designed with intention, precisely oriented, mathematically proportioned, and in some places shaped for acoustics. The echoes inside these spaces behaved like in a cathedral, deliberate, calculated. Some were carved like the throat of a serpent god. Others were shaped like the womb of Mother Earth. Inside, a priest's prayer didn't just echo, it resonated. It vibrated with the stone, with the water, with the air. It created a soundscape that felt supernatural, even terrifying, like hearing not just the voice of a man, but something answering from the other side. But maybe the real question isn't about how they built it, it's about what they hid. Were these tunnels made for walking or for hiding? Are there texts that were never meant to be brought to the surface? Symbols only meant to be seen by those who walked in shadow? And if so, why were these doors sealed shut, buried and forgotten? The answers don't come easily. But in the dim light of imagined torches, in the damp chill of ancient stone, you can feel it, that the Maya didn't just build on the surface of the earth, they built within the spirit. Their structures weren't just monuments to power, they were messages too sacred for words, meant only to be understood in darkness, an absolute silence. And it's down there, beneath the surface, where we encounter another sacred form, the cenotes. These deep, circular pools of water were more than just geological features to the ancient Maya. They were spiritual mirrors, portals to another world. To the Maya, cenotes weren't just wells, they were entrances, sacred doors to the underworld, still waters that reflected the sky, as if the heavens themselves had turned upside down and opened into the earth. Cenotes appear in incredible density across Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, where underground rivers carve through the porous limestone, forming thousands of natural sinkholes, some of which stretch for miles through sprawling cave systems. And it's no coincidence that Maya pyramids and cities were often built near these sacred pools. In fact, the great city of Chichen Itza wasn't just known for El Castillo, it was defined by its proximity to the sacred cenote, one of the largest and most important ritual sites in the entire Maya world. According to ancient texts and oral traditions passed down by Maya descendants, cenotes were believed to be the mouths of Xibalba, the Maya underworld, realm of gods, spirits, death, and rebirth. Each cenote was a spiritual gateway, a place where the soul could pass into the next world. During the most sacred rituals, the Maya offered treasures to these watery gates: gold, jade, obsidian, pottery, and sometimes people. Archaeological digs at the sacred cenote of Chichen Itza have confirmed this. Divers have recovered human bones, many of them children, alongside elaborate stone masks, jade necklaces, ornate ceramics, and effigies of gods. Were these sacrifices? Or perhaps, more fittingly, gifts? Offerings made to keep the universe in balance, to bring rain, fertility, and peace. But what makes cenotes truly mysterious isn't just the stories or the rituals, it's the cenotes themselves. Some are dozens of meters deep. The water is cold, crystal clear, and impossibly still, so still it mirrors the sky perfectly, like a doorway that doesn't open upward, but downward. Many are connected to vast cave systems so dark and silent, no light has ever touched them. Some even lead directly to underground chambers beneath temples and pyramids, suggesting that the Maya may have understood these spaces not just as spiritual symbols, but as architectural anchors, tying the earthly world to the one below. At Holtun Cenote, near the heart of Chichen Itza, researchers discovered deliberately paved stone platforms and carved columns, clear signs of underground ceremonial spaces. At Eslaka Cenote in Zibilchaltun, archaeologists found pottery vessels, god effigies, and even stone masks engraved with hieroglyphs. These weren't just water sources, they were shrines, places where humans once spoke to gods in silence. One fascinating and controversial theory suggests the Maya may have chosen certain cenotes not just for their geography but for their acoustics. When a voice is projected across the surface of a cenote, the echo resonates downward with an eerie, delayed reverb, creating a three-dimensional soundscape, much like the acoustic designs found at Tiwanaku or in European stone chambers. It's possible the Maya didn't measure the sacredness of a site with tools, but with spiritual sensitivity, a kind of intuitive knowledge we've long since forgotten. Today, science categorizes cenotes as geological features, but the Maya descendants still gather at their edges, lighting incense, casting marigold petals into the water, just like their ancestors did centuries ago. Because some truths aren't meant to be proven, they're meant to be remembered. Cenotes aren't just ancient wells, they're openings into the deeper layers of Maya thought, where the line between reality and symbol vanishes. If people once believed they could speak to the gods by standing at the water's edge and whispering into the void, maybe what they received in return wasn't a voice, but something else. A feeling, a knowing, a kind of wisdom that lives outside of words. And so, from the silent waters of the cenotes, where myth and memory meet, we move north into central Mexico. There, in a vast valley surrounded by mountains, rose one of the most mysterious cities in the ancient world. A place not built by the Maya, but no less powerful, no less grand, and no less unknown. Its name, Teotihuacan, the city of the gods. Teotihuacan, the colossal stone city at the heart of Mexico's Central Valley. When the Aztecs stumbled upon its towering ruins in the 14th century, They were so awestruck they named it the place where humans become gods. And that name, from the very beginning, carried a sacred weight, something distant, mysterious, and worthy of reverence. But here's the paradox. No one knows who built it. Teotihuacan didn't belong to the Aztecs. By the time they found it, the city had already been abandoned for more than 700 years. There were no legends, no names, no epics passed down through generations. All that remained was a meticulously designed city, dominated by a massive central boulevard stretching over 4 kilometers long, the Avenue of the Dead, lined with enormous pyramids, the Pyramid of the Sun, the Pyramid of the Moon, and the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, Quetzalcoatl. Surrounding them, hundreds of housing complexes, plazas, smaller temples, and underground passageways lost beneath the earth. The Pyramid of the Sun, second in size only to La Danta at El Mirador, is built from millions of tons of stone, all stacked without mortar. Its foundations are astronomically aligned with key solar events in the agricultural calendar. No written plans, no engineering records, and yet it still stands millennia later. Recent studies have revealed something even more intriguing. Beneath the pyramid lies a man-made cave, possibly a sacred ritual chamber, maybe even the spiritual heart of the city itself. And so the big questions remain. Who built Teotihuacan? When? And why? Some theories date the city's origin to around 100 BCE, with its peak flourishing around the 3rd century CE. At its height, it may have housed between 100,000 and 200,000 people, making it larger than any contemporary city in Europe. But there's no record of a ruling dynasty, no ethnic name, no known language. Some say the Totonac were the builders. Others suspect an unidentified pre-Aztec group. And then there are those who whisper, maybe it was a lost civilization, one we've yet to even name. What makes Teotihuacan even more perplexing is its astronomical precision. The city's main axis is tilted 15.5 degrees off true north, perfectly aligned with the setting sun during key agricultural and ritual days. The pyramids themselves appear to mirror the layout of Orion's belt, much like the pyramids of Giza in Egypt. This isn't just a symbolic resemblance, it extends into structural engineering, cosmological alignment, and ceremonial function. It's as if Teotihuacan, like Giza, was designed as a cosmic machine. Some independent researchers have proposed bold theories that Teotihuacan was conceived as a kind of ancient cosmic transit hub, a place where earth and sky, humans and divine forces could intersect. They point to the city's alignment with solar and lunar cycles, eclipse nodes, and even the natural electromagnetic fields of the earth. Another theory suggests that a caste of priest engineers once lived here, people who understood how to harness energy from stone, water, and light to sustain the rhythms of society. A concept not unlike how the Inca later integrated flowing water into sacred rituals. Still, these are only fragments of a larger puzzle. The truth of Teotihuacan remains buried beneath layers of stone dust, behind sealed tunnels, in the blank eyes of weathered gods that still line the temple facades. The city doesn't explain itself, it doesn't tell a story, it simply stands like a memory too enormous to be written down. A place that was once alive with meaning, but now speaks only in silence. Beneath the worn stone steps of Teotihuacan, smoothed by centuries of wind, dust, and silence, lies a hidden world, an underground network of tunnels like the veins of a sleeping giant. If the surface of the city was built for grand ceremonies, bustling plazas, and pyramids reaching toward the heavens, then what lies below tells a different story, a quieter one. A sacred space where every echo sounds like a memory sealed in stone. These tunnels weren't accidental. They weren't geological quirks, they were part of Teotihuacan's spiritual architecture, intentionally crafted, designed to lead not outward but inward. And only by stepping into the darkness can one begin to understand what the city was truly protecting. One of the most astonishing discoveries of the 21st century was the tunnel beneath the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, Quetzalcoatl. When ground-penetrating radar was first used there in 2003, archaeologists detected an anomaly under the temple floor. It would take more than 6 years of excavation to reach the entrance, sealed intentionally with layers of stone, pottery shards and clay, as if someone long ago didn't want that doorway opened again. But when the final barrier was removed, they found a tunnel over 100 meters long, stretching directly beneath the pyramid. What they found inside was surreal. The walls were coated with a powder made from pyrite and mica, minerals with natural reflective properties, so that the tunnel shimmered when lit, like a crystalline corridor. Scattered across the floor were hundreds of small metallic spheres, each the size of a baseball, carefully crafted and coated in golden iron oxide. No one knows what they were for, but they weren't random decoration. Some believe they were part of a visual spiritual ritual designed to create intense emotional effects as firelight bounced and danced across the golden surfaces, giving the illusion of entering another world. At the end of the tunnel was a chamber carved like a sacred womb, what some have called the womb of the earth, a place where the soul might be symbolically reborn after death. Wall niches hinted at once holding effigies, offerings, or even human remains. But all had long since decayed or disappeared, and yet the energy of the space remained, dense, sacred, hard to describe, the kind of silence that feels alive, like something still lingering in the cold stone and damp air, refusing to fade. And this wasn't the only tunnel. Radar surveys have also detected hollow cavities beneath the Pyramid of the Sun, and even what may be a central axis, an underground road once connecting Teotihuacan's major temples. Many of these passages have collapsed or been sealed, but soil samples revealed traces of mercury, a rare, toxic element often associated with high-level rituals or ancient alchemy. In many old belief systems, mercury wasn't just a liquid metal. It symbolized the essence of spirit, the flow of energy between worlds. Some researchers, stepping beyond conventional archaeology, have asked, could these tunnels have functioned as consciousness chambers? A place where priest-kings or initiates were led into deep meditative states, triggering altered perception, allowing them to access symbolic visions or even ancient knowledge. In pitch-black silence, with stable temperature, echoing acoustics and shimmering light, the mind slips into a trance with ease. Maybe this was where Teotihuacan's cosmic priests spoke with gods, or received messages without language, knowledge passed not through words, but through experience. Like many sacred sites around the world, Teotihuacan may have been designed with a unified principle, aligning the human soul with the structure of the cosmos. In that sense, the tunnels weren't just physical, they were metaphors. They represented the descent, both literal and symbolic, a passage from light to shadow, from the visible world to the unseen, from the surface to the soul. And when you finally emerge from that darkness, stepping back into the blinding sun of the Mexican Valley, one thought lingers. Whoever built this place, they weren't just worshippers, they were philosophers of space, engineers of spirit, thinkers who understood the deeper mechanics of human consciousness and cosmic design. And maybe, just maybe, it's only when we stop seeing them as primitive and start seeing them as visionaries that we'll begin to understand why Teotihuacan still refuses to speak its builder's name. And as that question still floats unanswered, we're left wondering, were the Aztecs truly the heirs of Teotihuacan? Or were they later arrivals, adopting, mimicking, and stitching together fragments of a forgotten golden age that had already vanished from memory? There's something fascinating about how the Aztecs arrived in the Valley of Mexico. They didn't come as founders, they came like pilgrims, searching for something sacred. When they found Teotihuacan, it was already long abandoned. Grass grew tall over its stone steps, and the grand roads that once echoed with life had fallen into shadows. But instead of seeing it as a ruin, they saw it as something holy, a place where gods had once been born, where humans had become divine. They placed themselves into the cosmic story they believed had started right there. But were they truly the cultural descendants of the Teotihuacanos? Or were they just latecomers, awestruck by remnants far beyond their understanding? Aztec mythology speaks of Aztlan, a mythical homeland to the north, from which they began their divine journey southward. When they saw an eagle perched on a cactus, gripping a snake in its beak, they knew they had arrived at their destined place. That's where they built Tenochtitlan, their magnificent capital. And yet, in all those legends, there's a strange silence. None claim that they built Teotihuacan. They honored it. They worshipped there. But always as outsiders, with reverence, even fear. They walked its worn staircases like visitors entering a temple of a long-lost god. Archaeologically, no evidence has ever been found linking the Aztecs as direct successors of Teotihuacan. The languages were different, the symbols, the social structures, completely distinct. Teotihuacan left no written records. The Aztecs had symbolic codices. Aztec architecture was defensive, brutal, deeply rooted in blood rituals. Teotihuacan's architecture, by contrast, evokes meditation, cosmic alignment, and silence. The difference isn't just chronological, it's philosophical. The Aztecs were about sacrifice, conquest, and divine mandate through blood. Teotihuacan seemed built for resonance with the universe, not for war. Still, the Aztecs drew deep inspiration from Teotihuacan. They imitated its architecture, borrowed its divine names, and built their own ceremonial centers aligned to the cosmos, just as the ancient city had. The god Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, became one of their most sacred deities, though that figure may have originated as far back as the Olmec and was already central to Teotihuacan temples centuries earlier. The Aztecs weren't inventing, they were reviving the shadow of a world they barely understood, dressing it in new clothes of fear, power, and ritual. Many scholars even argue that the Aztecs didn't fully grasp what they inherited. Like someone who finds an ancient melody and plays it by ear, they repeated rituals, rebuilt symbols, but didn't have the original song. Instead of cosmic harmony, they called the gods with blood. Their sacrifices grew more violent, more theatrical, as if trying to wake a sleeping world with a nightmare. That doesn't mean they lacked greatness. On the contrary, the Aztecs were master administrators, fearsome warriors, and brilliant city builders. Tenochtitlan was larger and more organized than many European cities of the same time, but the spirit they inherited, if it was truly inheritance, was fractured. They stood atop a forgotten greatness, knowing it was sacred, but unable to unlock the door. Their power was tinged with tragedy, glorious, yet distant from its origin. And in repeating the past, the Aztecs wove themselves into myth. They made themselves the axis of the world, the center of the sun's turning. But history, never one to obey myth, cut their story short. A fatal encounter with a new world from the east, armed with steel and gunpowder, ended the Aztec Empire swiftly and brutally. The empire that offered blood to keep the cosmos spinning was, in the end, swept away by a tide they couldn't control. Still, to truly understand them, the light and the shadow, we must look deeper into their sacrificial rites. These weren't just acts of violence, they were a cosmic bargain, a sacred contract between mortals and gods. In that space, we'll begin to see why they believed the sun needed blood, and why they feared that without it, life itself would stop. As dawn broke over Tenochtitlan, the first light of day touched the stone steps of the Templo Mayor, reflecting off the blood-red walls of the temple, still wet from the ritual of the day before. But for the Aztecs, this wasn't something horrifying. This was life being sustained. This was proof that the sun was still moving across the sky, because the people had done their part. They had offered blood, the most sacred fuel in the universe. In the Aztec worldview, sacrifice wasn't brutality, it was necessity, a sacred contract between humans and the gods, sealed not just in belief but in flesh and blood. The Aztecs believed they were living in the fifth sun, a fragile cosmic era that could only continue if humans upheld their end of the bargain. According to their mythology, previous worlds had been destroyed when people failed to nourish the sun with the vital essence of life. To prevent that fate from repeating, the Aztecs built an entire civilization around one divine duty: to feed the sun with blood, to tear out living hearts so that the universe could be reborn again and again, every single day. And so sacrifice became the center of everything: religion, politics, even warfare. Battles weren't just fought for territory, but to capture prisoners of war, flower warriors chosen not for punishment, but for offering. The braver the captive, the greater the honor in sacrifice. They were fed well, dressed in finery, led up the temple steps with music and dancing. The ritual was contradictory and profound, honoring someone at the highest level by preparing them to die. At the summit of the Templo Mayor, beneath the blazing sun, Aztec priests used obsidian blades to cut open the chests of the living. As the still beating heart was raised toward the heavens, blood was poured into sacred vessels and splashed on the statues of the gods. The bodies were rolled down the temple steps, their blood flowing through carved stone channels back into the earth, into the body of Tlaltecutli, the Earth Mother. During major ceremonies, Spanish chroniclers reported that hundreds of hearts could be offered in a single day, scenes that left them horrified and speechless. But to the Aztecs, this wasn't barbarism, it was sacred duty. The dead weren't victims, they were givers of life. Blood wasn't just a substance, it was a symbol of the soul. Death in ritual wasn't an end, it was a transformation, a rebirth into a higher realm where warriors became gods, riding the sun across the sky by day and returning through the underworld at night. That's why sacrifice wasn't just a ritual in Aztec society, it was its foundation. Every major structure had an altar, every harvest, victory, coronation bathed in blood. Even the sacred ball games where the winner, not the loser, might be offered to the gods, or the most beautiful, most gifted individuals in society, chosen to live a year as divine embodiments, only to be killed on their destined day. Nothing was separate: religion, politics, identity, they were all woven together. The ruler wasn't just king, he was the living face of the divine. And blood was the cosmic message, the proof that the order of the universe still held. This belief system gave the Aztec Empire immense power. By controlling the rituals, the priests and nobles controlled faith, emotion, and fear. They turned war into worship, death into honor, and society into a machine powered by myth. The Aztecs rose rapidly, not just through swords, but through ideology, a belief so deeply rooted that people were willing to die for it, and saw beauty in doing so. But when ships with white sails arrived from the east, bringing armored riders and fire-spitting weapons, that world began to crumble, not just from disease and gunpowder, but from the collapse of belief itself. The myths could no longer stand against a reality too foreign, too sudden. And so Tezcatlipoca, the god of shifting shadows, spoke again. But that is a story of endings, for now we turn our gaze north, to a place most never thought held any ancient secrets, to quiet ruins hidden in the heartland of what is now the United States. Among strange earthen mounds and the buried skeleton of a forgotten city, we begin to uncover a civilization few have heard of, Cahokia, the lost empire of North America. Across the flat plains along the Mississippi River, right where the modern state of Illinois now lies, there once stood an ancient city few, today, would ever imagine. No stone pyramids, no towering deities, no intricately carved temples. And yet Cahokia was the largest urban center in North America before European contact. At its peak, between 1050 and 1200 CE, it held an estimated 15,000 to 40,000 people, more than London at the time. Cahokia is a mystery still unfolding, a civilization that rose to remarkable heights and then vanished without a word. When French explorers traveled down the Mississippi in the 17th century, they stumbled upon massive earthen mounds stretching for miles, some rising high into the sky, shaped with terraces and flat tops that clearly once held ceremonial structures. The largest of them, Monk's Mound, still stands today, nearly 100 feet high, over 1,000 feet wide. It remains the biggest earthen construction ever built in North America. But the most baffling thing was this: there were no people left, no city, no inhabitants, no legends, just the quiet presence of ancient earthworks and the ashes of a once great metropolis. Cahokia wasn't like the scattered jungle ruins of the Maya. It was a real city, carefully laid out with a ceremonial core, residential districts, industrial areas, and a system of water management and marketplaces. Homes made of wood, clay, and thatch surrounded a massive central plaza that once hosted community rituals involving thousands of people. Here, archaeologists discovered traces of a wood henge, a circular arrangement of giant wooden posts aligned with the rising and setting points of the sun throughout the year. It revealed that the people of Cahokia were not only sky watchers, they were timekeepers. Their understanding of astronomy guided both their rituals and their agriculture. But it didn't stop there. Cahokia was at the heart of a massive trade network that stretched from the Gulf of Mexico to the Great Lakes. Artifacts found at the site include obsidian from the Rocky Mountains, seashells from the Atlantic coast, and copper from Lake Superior. This wasn't an isolated village, it was a hub, a central node in a vast native civilization that spanned the American Midwest. And yet its fall came swiftly and quietly. There's no evidence of war, no signs of fires or sieges, only a sudden decline around the 14th century. Scholars have proposed various theories: climate change, deforestation, flooding, political upheaval. But without a written language, all we have are fragments, pieces of a larger story that's been washed away by time. Maybe, just maybe, in some final ritual, when the sun no longer rose in the right place, or the harvest failed to follow its sacred rhythm, the people of Cahokia believed the gods had left them, and so they left too. What makes Cahokia so powerful isn't just its size, it's how it breaks the mold. Western history tends to paint pre-Columbian North America as a land of scattered tribes and small communities. Cahokia proves otherwise. It shows us a moment in time when cities thrived, ceremonies united thousands, astronomy guided society, and trade flowed like rivers. And not only did it exist, it rivaled the great civilizations of Mesoamerica and Europe in scale and complexity. So why isn't it in our history books? Why do so few Americans even know it existed? Maybe because it doesn't fit the story Western education prefers to tell. a native city that grew without European help, one that was already thriving before the very idea of America was born. That can be uncomfortable for the victors who got to write the textbooks. Like Teotihuacan, El Mirador, and Caral, Cahokia feels like one of the missing links in a long chain of indigenous civilizations that were fractured, forgotten, or erased. No epic legends. No direct descendants claiming its legacy. And yet the mounds remain, silent witnesses, reminding us that under our feet once stood a city that listened to the stars. And from Cahokia, our eyes turn toward another enigma, curving shapes stretched across the earth. Animal-shaped mounds laid out with such precision and intent that no simple logic can explain them. They aren't random, they're symbols, reflections of a deeper worldview where nature, spirit, and mathematics merged into one living landscape. Scattered across the green hills and winding rivers of the American Midwest, from Iowa to Wisconsin, Minnesota to Ohio, lie thousands of strange mounds. At first glance, they look like nothing more than gentle bumps in the earth. But when seen from above, a different picture emerges. The shapes are clear: birds, bears, turtles, snakes, even creatures that defy identification. These are the effigy mounds, animal-shaped earthworks built more than 1,000 years ago by ancient peoples whose symbols still speak to us, even though their voices are long gone. To this day, they remain one of North America's greatest archaeological mysteries. Unlike burial or residential mounds, effigy mounds weren't meant to be lived on. They were made to be seen. From the ground, their full forms are invisible, but from the sky, or from the imagined flight of a spirit or a bird, their shapes become unmistakable. Sprawling animal forms drawn in soil across the landscape, which raises a staggering question. How did people without aerial views or satellite maps create these massive designs, only visible from above? Were they guided purely by intuition? Or did they possess a spatial awareness we've forgotten how to understand? Most effigy mounds range from 60 to over 300 feet in length. They were constructed over years, shaped from basket loads of dirt, clay, and stone, laid layer by careful layer using only tools made of wood and bone. Archaeologists believe they were built by woodland and Mississippian cultures between 500 and 1200 CE. The same era as Cahokia. But why animals? That question remains open. Some scholars suggest they represent a sacred map of the universe, a cosmogram. Birds for the sky, four-legged animals for the earth, serpents and reptiles for the underworld. Taken together, the mounds might symbolize a vision of the cosmos itself, layered across time and terrain. At Ohio's famous Serpent Mound, the great curving body of a snake stretches over 1,300 feet and aligns with astronomical events, solstices, eclipses, even the path of Halley's Comet. That kind of alignment isn't coincidence, it's cosmic memory written in Earth. Other theories say the mounds mark the presence of guardian spirits or ancestral totems, permanent symbols etched into the land in lieu of a written language. Without words, these people left behind images that would last: a turtle, a bird, a bear, so that future generations could look to the skies and see their ancestors in the shapes below. In some mounds, archaeologists have found human remains or simple burial items, clay pots, stone tools, but most contain nothing at all. These weren't necessarily tombs. They were spiritual messages carved into the ground. Many native communities today still share stories of sacred animals that dwell in the land, fly across the sky, or guard the rivers. For them, the effigy mounds are more than ancient art. They're places of communion, points where the physical world and the spirit world touch. The forms call upon the powers of the animals they depict, invoking protection, memory, and harmony. These were sacred ceremonies not held inside stone temples, but within shapes molded by earth and belief. What makes these mounds extraordinary is that they don't impress through size or grandeur. Their power is subtle. It lies in the quiet symbolism, in their cosmic alignment, in the way they link land and sky. They don't shout, they whisper, they speak in the language of shape, silence, and invisible bonds between humans, animals, and the stars. No inscriptions, no statues. And yet when you stand before a massive bird effigy precisely aligned with the sunrise, you understand these builders were anything but primitive. They were listeners. They didn't write history in ink, they wrote it in grass and soil. Sadly, many of these sacred mounds have already been erased, flattened for roads, farmland, or simply because no one realized what they were. Some are being preserved, but much has been lost. And with every mound destroyed, a part of indigenous memory vanishes forever, a letter from a book that was never written. From these looping symbols across the plains, we now travel farther southwest, to the red deserts cracked by heat and time. There, hidden among cliffs and canyons, lie one of the greatest unsolved stories of ancient America. Abandoned stone cities and cliffside dwellings. Where an ancient people once lived, the Anasazi. In the arid expanse of the Four Corners region, where Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Utah meet, lies a vast landscape of red rock carved over millennia by desert winds and time. It's a place where the people seem to have vanished long ago, yet their traces remain, etched into cliff faces like an unfinished dream. This is the land of the Anasazi, a name long used to describe the ancient Puebloan peoples who once flourished in the American Southwest, building cities in stone, cultivating the desert, and crafting a rich spiritual life, only to disappear suddenly in the 13th century. Their story is one of North America's deepest mysteries, a civilization that climbed to greatness, then stepped away without a word. Their legacy is scattered across the Colorado Plateau. In places like Mesa Verde, their homes are tucked into enormous rock alcoves, stone dwellings built into sheer cliffs. In Hovenweep, delicate stone towers rise from sun-bleached sandstone, each one hand-laid with precision. And at Chaco Canyon, the most complex of all, their ceremonial center still defies full archaeological explanation. They didn't use massive stone blocks like the Inca, nor cement like the Romans. Instead, they stacked finely shaped stones, layer by careful layer, into walls that have withstood centuries of harsh desert weather. Chaco Canyon, in particular, feels impossible. Its great houses contain hundreds of rooms, multi-story walls, and architectural alignments with the solstices and equinoxes. Wide ceremonial roads, some more than 30 feet across, stretch across the canyons, cut through ridges, run across mesas, defying the natural terrain in perfectly straight lines. No one knows exactly what they were used for, pilgrimages, processions, or symbolism, but their scale and precision suggest a level of social organization and engineering that far surpasses what we once imagined of the ancient Southwest. What's even more remarkable is how the Anasazi thrived in such an unforgiving land. With no rivers to rely on, they harvested rainwater, built reservoirs, and created terraced farms bordered by rock walls to retain moisture. They grew corn, beans, and squash, staples of survival, in soil most wouldn't dare to plant. Life here wasn't just endurance, it was adaptation, intelligent, sustainable, and deeply spiritual. Beneath their plazas were circular subterranean chambers called kivas, used for ceremonies, storytelling, and passing down sacred knowledge about nature, seasons, and the cosmos. Then around 1270 they left. The cities emptied, homes abandoned, watchtowers silent, the sacred roads swallowed by drifting sand, no signs of invasion, no epidemic, just quiet. Some theories point to drought, ecological collapse, or overuse of resources. Others speak of internal conflict, loss of spiritual cohesion, or a ceremonial withdrawal when a people believed their time had passed, and it was time to move on so that a new cycle could begin. What's most profound is this: the modern Pueblo peoples, descendants of the Anasazi, don't see that departure as a collapse. To them, it was a migration, a spiritual journey, a necessary step in maintaining balance with the land. They don't return to rebuild the old cities because their time has passed. The structures are not ruins, they're memories, like the earth exhaling. Modern eyes see disappearance. The ancestors may have seen transformation. The walls the Anasazi built don't tell the full story, but they echo something deeper. A way of living in harmony with harshness, a civilization both humble and wise. One that didn't try to dominate nature but lived as part of it. That's why when you stand in Mesa Verde on the steps leading to a room long empty, and sunlight strikes the stone in exactly the same place it did 1,000 years ago, you fall silent. And from that silence, we move west again, into the heart of Chaco Canyon. This isn't just a ruin, it's a sacred center. A place where sun and moon cycles are carved in stone. A place that challenges us more than ever to ask, how much did the ancients know about the sky? In the parched highlands of New Mexico, where the desert meets the horizon like stretched hide beneath a searing sun, there lies a canyon of stone. Quiet, sun-baked, and unlike anything else in North America. At first glance, Chaco Canyon might look like just a deep fissure between two mesas. But hidden within it is one of the most astonishing feats of ancient human intellect, an architectural wonder built not for defense, not even for daily living, but seemingly for something far more profound, to speak with the cosmos. Over 1,000 years ago, the ancient Pueblo people created something extraordinary here. What remains still puzzles archaeologists and astronomers alike. Who built Chaco Canyon? And how did they come to understand the sky with such depth? At the center of the canyon stand the Great Houses, massive stone compounds like Pueblo Bonito, Chetroquetl, and Hungopavi. Each one contains hundreds of rooms, some rising up to 4 stories, crafted from sandstone and timber carried from miles away. But more incredible than their size is their precision. These buildings are aligned perfectly with the rising and setting sun during solstices and equinoxes. Windows, doorways, and corridors were designed so that sunlight would strike specific points only on those transitional days, transforming the space into a kind of solar calendar built in stone. High on a butte at the northwest edge of the canyon stands one of the most remarkable ancient observatories ever discovered, the Sun Dagger. There, 3 vertical stone slabs frame a spiral carved into the rock. At noon on the summer solstice, a narrow beam of light, sharp as a dagger, cuts directly through the center of the spiral. During the winter solstice, twin daggers frame the spiral's edges. And on the spring and autumn equinoxes, the light perfectly kisses the rim. This isn't just art, it's mastery of light, shadow, and time in 3-dimensional space. They didn't have telescopes or clocks, just intuition, memory, and generational knowledge that outlasted ink. Researchers have since found that the entire architectural network of Chaco Canyon, its houses, its ceremonial kivas, even its walkways, are deeply tied to celestial movements. Some pathways align with the 18.6-year lunar cycle known as the Major Lunar Standstill, an event so subtle that even modern astronomers need years of data to track it. Was this a coincidence, or did the ancient Puebloans study the sky for generations, encoding what they learned into the very stones beneath their feet? Even more curious, Chaco wasn't a city in the typical sense. Despite the scale of the great houses, the number of full-time residents was relatively low. Most people lived in smaller villages nearby and only traveled to Chaco for special occasions. Archaeological evidence suggests this was a ceremonial center, a sacred gathering place, more a cosmic library than a metropolis, a temple of silence written in geometry. And then there are the roads. Long, wide, and unnervingly straight, some spanning dozens, even hundreds of miles, they slice through the landscape with a focus that ignores topography, climbing hills, cutting through cliffs, adhering not to ease, but to meaning. These weren't just trade routes, they were symbolic axes, connecting sacred sites in a web of time and space. To this day, many Pueblo people regard Chaco as a sacred place. They don't see ruins, they see memory. They believe their ancestors listened to the whispers of the land and sky and recorded what they heard in stone, in shadow, in silence, not in words, in presence. For the modern world, Chaco is a humbling lesson, a reminder that once we knew how to live in rhythm with the earth and sky. That knowledge doesn't always come through books. It can live in the way sunlight touches a wall once a year, in the angle of a doorway, in the breath between solstices. And so as we leave Chaco Canyon, the question isn't who built this anymore. The real question is, how did we forget that we too once read the universe through light and shape? Next, we journey south, into the depths of the Amazon rainforest, where whispers of a lost city of gold have never fully faded. Could it be that beneath the jungle canopy lies another forgotten civilization, one swallowed not by time, but by modern denial? The city of Zo El Dorado still waits to be found. The legend of El Dorado began not as a myth about gold, but with a real ceremony on the waters of Lake Guatavita, in what is now Colombia. There, the leader of the Muisca people would be covered in gold dust, then paddled out to the center of the lake to offer treasures into the depths below. That ritual, dazzling, symbolic, profound, ignited the imagination of 16th-century Europeans. Over time, the image of a gilded man gave way to something far grander, an entire city made of gold, then an empire, one that no one had ever seen, but many were willing to die trying to find. Spanish, Portuguese, English, and German expeditions plunged into the Amazon like moths into flame, driven mad by the promise of riches and power. Among them, no one stood out more than Percy Fawcett, the British explorer who became convinced that deep within the Brazilian jungle lay an ancient city he called Zed, a lost civilization of advanced architecture, complex social organization, and forgotten knowledge. Drawing from ancient texts, indigenous accounts, and an uncanny intuition, Fawcett led multiple expeditions. In 1925, he and his son vanished without a trace, leaving behind not answers, but a haunting possibility that the Amazon is not a wilderness of nothingness but a forest that has buried something more complex than we've ever acknowledged. Almost a century later, modern technology is beginning to suggest that Fawcett might have been right. With the help of LiDAR, light detection sensors that penetrate thick tree canopy, scientists have revealed what the human eye could never see. Beneath the seemingly untouched forest lies a network of geometric structures, grids of streets, ceremonial plazas, circular earthworks, canals, irrigation systems, and even earthen pyramids, spread across the Amazon basin in dense concentration. These discoveries are rewriting everything we thought we knew. The Amazon, once believed to be a pristine, untouched wilderness, now appears to be a cultivated landscape, an engineered ecosystem shaped by human hands over thousands of years. Evidence suggests that millions of people once lived in these forests before European contact. Their communities were interconnected by rivers and roads. Their agriculture was sustained not by slash and burn farming, but by terra preta, dark earth, a human-made, nutrient-rich soil still unmatched by modern farming techniques. These weren't just foragers or isolated tribes. They were ecological engineers, creators of forest cities that thrived in harmony with the jungle instead of clearing it. And perhaps it was these civilizations, cities, built not from stone and steel, but from soil, water, and trees, that became the real El Dorado, a city the Europeans never found, not because it didn't exist, but because they couldn't recognize it when they were standing inside it. Trained to look for towers, fortresses, and gold, they missed the softer architecture, where walls are made of vines and power flows through irrigation, not conquest. In that sense, El Dorado isn't a location, it's a misunderstanding, a mirror showing how we've defined civilization through our own narrow lens. The gold hunters never found it because they searched only for what could be held in their hands. But the true El Dorado, if it ever existed, was a place where culture merged with nature so completely that it vanished into the trees. Today, as the Amazon faces rampant deforestation, these newly discovered ruins are once again at risk, this time not from myth or greed, but from bulldozers and apathy. Once more, El Dorado slips from our grasp, not because it isn't real, but because we still haven't learned to see history differently. Maybe, one day, when we stop treating the forest as an obstacle and begin to see it as an archive, the clues will finally come together. But by then, will anyone still believe in a city not made of gold, but of knowledge? And if these civilizations in the Amazon were real, then the next traces, the forest cities, the forgotten settlements, the manipulated maps, will take us deeper still, into a tangled web of legend and archaeology, a place where the ancients may have gone much further than we ever thought in shaping the natural world. For most of modern history, the Amazon has been drawn as a place untouched, an endless, impenetrable rainforest where small tribal groups lived, scattered, without writing, without cities, and without what Western history considered civilization. But every falling leaf, every branch decomposing into the damp soil has buried a piece of memory. And today those memories are beginning to rise again. Faint outlines revealed by LiDAR scans, pottery shards unearthed by a single rainstorm, rivers that twist like the remnants of boulevards from a world that's been erased from our maps. What's slowly emerging is a truth that's hard to swallow, that deep within the Amazon once stood prehistoric civilizations as large and complex as any empire we know, completely forgotten. Recently, LiDAR, laser-based remote sensing technology, has revealed something stunning: geometric earthworks spread across the Amazon basin, especially in Brazil, Bolivia, and Peru. More than 450 formations, circles, squares, octagons, connected by long, straight roads and carved canals, have been found hidden beneath what was thought to be untouched forest. These aren't the work of small, scattered tribes. They required a high level of social organization, large labor forces, and a worldview deeply tied to geometry and cosmology. In Bolivia's Llanos de Mojos region, archaeologists uncovered an ancient agricultural system made up of thousands of raised fields, long oval mounds designed to avoid seasonal flooding. These were connected by drainage canals, artificial ponds, and earthen levees. What looked like a swamp was actually a vast, high-yield farming system. Some call it floating agriculture, but it's more than that. It was advanced ecological engineering, an artificial forest shaped over millennia, not to conquer nature, but to collaborate with it. These people didn't leave behind towering stone temples or golden statues. They left behind a self-sustaining ecosystem, an intelligence rooted in soil, water, and trees. Instead of forcing rivers, they guided them. Instead of cutting down forests, they planted companion species to boost biodiversity. They created terra preta, an artificial black earth enriched with charcoal, organic waste, and microorganisms capable of holding nutrients for centuries. To this day, scientists haven't fully replicated it. Could this soil innovation have been the foundation that made long-term settlement and forest cities possible? At sites like Cuicugu, near the Brazil-Peru border, archaeologists have mapped out an entire urban complex. Defensive earthen walls, moats, ceremonial plazas, and straight roads linking multiple settlements. The design shows social stratification, shared rituals, and long-term planning. It's a picture that completely contradicts the long-standing myth of primitive forest dwellers. These weren't isolated tribes, they were city builders. The silence in our history books about these cultures isn't just due to time. When Europeans entered the Amazon in the 16th century, they brought war, disease, and the collapse of indigenous social structures. Epidemics like smallpox and influenza may have killed over 90% of the population in just a few generations. Cities were abandoned and the jungle returned, burying the memories. By the time later explorers arrived, all they saw was forest and a few scattered tribes. No one left to tell the story of the lost cities beneath their feet. Like the final notes of a symphony abruptly cut short, these civilizations didn't fade because they failed from within. They vanished because their memory was buried. But now, as rivers are retraced, soils are tested, and shards of pottery rise to the surface, a new map of history is emerging, not just of trees, but of the people who once shaped them. And if the Amazon once nurtured cities that lived in harmony with the forest, their traces don't end underground. They ripple outward to the edges of the known world, where strange symbols are carved into the land itself, lines and shapes that seem to call out across time and space. That's where we go next. Nazca, where ancient lines still stretch across the desert, like messages sent to someone just beyond our reach. Across the arid highlands of southern Peru, in a barren expanse blanketed with red stones, something extraordinary appears, but only when you leave the ground. From above, where only birds or modern aircraft can truly observe it, perfectly straight lines stretch for miles, slicing across hills and valleys as if drawn by a cosmic ruler. Among them lie enormous figures: a monkey, a hummingbird, a spider, a human, a tree, a spiral hand. All created not with walls or paint, but by simply removing the dark surface gravel to reveal the pale earth beneath, using nothing but proportion, patience, and intuition. This is Nazca. And ever since the 20th century, the world has asked the same question: who carved these lines? Why? And why can we only see the full picture from the sky? The giant geoglyphs of Nazca are believed to have been made by the Nazca culture, a pre-Incan society that lived between roughly 200 BCE and 600 CE. While most of their people farmed and crafted, a portion of their community devoted years, perhaps even centuries, to creating one of the most abstract and enigmatic projects in human history. But the mystery is this: these designs cannot be properly seen from the ground. Some lines stretch over 12 miles. The largest figures span hundreds of feet. So how did a society without aircraft, without high observation towers, manage to create images only visible from the heavens? That question has sparked a wide range of theories, some grounded, others fantastical. Some suggest the Nazca may have used primitive hot air balloons to see from above, a theory unproven but not entirely implausible. Others believe the lines were messages to sky gods, though not always in the religious sense. One of the most famous and controversial theories came from Erich von Däniken in the 20th century, who claimed the lines were landing strips for ancient aliens. While the scientific community has largely dismissed that idea, it continues to haunt the cultural imagination. But stepping away from the speculation and back into the realm of archaeology, researchers have begun to uncover more grounded and perhaps even stranger clues. Some geoglyphs align with constellations, Others point directly to sunrise or sunset during solstices and equinoxes. Some seem to trace underground water sources or sit atop what were once sacred wells. It's possible that these lines and figures were never meant to be seen in the modern sense, but understood. A symbolic map where belief, astronomy, agriculture, and survival converged. The animal figures may have been ceremonial totems. The straight lines could have marked pilgrimage routes or ritual pathways for dry season ceremonies. In the harsh, arid environment of Nazca, rain was life, and rituals to summon it may have been at the very core of their religion. And here's the paradox: the harshness of the desert is exactly what preserved them. The region is so dry, so windswept, and so devoid of erosion that the lines remain intact, untouched by time. No paint fades, no structure collapses. Nature itself has protected this open-air manuscript, page after page, never turned. When you stand among them, there's no clear boundary between faith, art, and science. And perhaps that's what makes Nazca so haunting. We're facing a way of thinking that no longer exists, a mindset that didn't divide the world into categories. It didn't need explanations, it needed connection. Whether these lines were star maps, agricultural calendars, sacred roads, or messages to another world, Nazca remains a mirror, one that reflects back the limits of modern understanding, because sometimes a straight line in the desert doesn't need to mean anything. It just needs to exist, to remind us that once, long ago, humans knew how to speak to the sky without saying a word. And now, from these mysterious symbols etched into the earth, we turn west, toward the towering cliffs that cradle one of the Inca civilization's highest cities, Machu Picchu. A place not only of breathtaking architecture, but of unanswered questions about intellect, engineering, and spirit, possibly passed down from cultures long before the Inca ever made their name. High in the soaring peaks of the Andes, where white clouds drift across sheer cliffs and jagged ridges, the stone walls of the Inca still stand, silent, unshaken, and defiant. No mortar, no steel, no modern machinery, just massive stones cut and fit together with such precision that not even a razor blade can slip between them. The Inca Empire, centered in Cusco, the navel of the world, left behind architecture that modern engineers still marvel at. But what's even more astonishing than their technique is the worldview behind it, one where people, architecture, and nature were never separate, a world where stone seemed to breathe with the earth. The Inca called their empire Tawantinsuyu, the land of four quarters, stretching from modern-day Colombia all the way down to Chile, carved along the unforgiving terrain of the Andes. And on those steep slopes, they built an astonishing network of over 25,000 miles of roads connecting mountains, forests, deserts, and high plains. They built rope bridges from woven grass that still stand today. Without the wheel, they moved stones weighing dozens of tons. Without a written language, they recorded numbers and history using quipu, knotted strings carrying information. But above all, they were masters of stone, architects who seemed to understand mass, gravity, and resilience on an intuitive level. At Sacsayhuaman, above the city of Cusco, massive stones, some weighing over 120 tons, are fit together in a perfect jigsaw. The walls curve like waves, absorbing the shock of earthquakes, something modern buildings rely on advanced engineering to achieve. There's no mortar, no fasteners, just shapes, complex, multi-angled, tightly interlocked stones that seem molded rather than carved. Yet there are no metal tools, no cranes. How did the Inca do it? Some theories suggest they used softer stones and sand to grind the harder ones. Others speculate they may have harnessed natural resonance or understood how to manipulate terrain for mechanical advantage. But the truth remains elusive. What we do know is this: the Inca weren't simply builders. They understood stone the way a musician understands notes, where to press, where to pause, and how to let the silence speak. What's more remarkable is how they never forced their structures onto nature. They adapted. At Ollantaytambo, agricultural terraces were carved into mountain slopes, using wind and sunlight to create sustainable microclimates. At Tipon, a hydraulic masterpiece of stone canals and terraces keeps water flowing with precision to this day. Every element was balanced, not destruction, but harmony. And then there's Machu Picchu, built at 2,430 meters above sea level, like a city suspended in the clouds. Every stone seems to belong exactly where it is. Every wall is aligned to catch the solstice light. Every window opens toward a sacred sunrise. Water flows through temple channels like an unspoken prayer. No one knows why Machu Picchu was abandoned, but as you walk among its time-worn terraces, you can't help but feel it. The Inca tapped into a level of knowledge we've only begun to rediscover. No one knows for certain where their building knowledge came from, but it's clear the Inca inherited something ancient, a memory not written in books but carved in stone. The walls at Cusco and Ollantaytambo aren't just remnants of a great civilization. They are whispers, trying to tell a story we've yet to fully hear. And if these stones are speaking, then perhaps their message points to somewhere even more sacred. Lake Titicaca. Here, at dizzying altitudes in the Andes, where nature and mythology merge into one, the mysteries only deepen. From tales of the god Viracocha to the ruins submerged beneath silent waters, everything seems to whisper that beneath the surface of serenity lies the sediment of a forgotten civilization, one that once shaped stone as if speaking with the cosmos, and then vanished, leaving behind questions modern history has yet to answer. And perhaps in this birthplace of ancient myth, we may find clues to what stone has kept hidden for thousands of years. In the year 2000, a joint team of Bolivian and Cuban researchers launched the first large-scale underwater archaeological expedition at Lake Titicaca. What they discovered shocked the academic world. Beneath 20 meters of water lay stone walls, foundations, paved roads, staircases, ceremonial courtyards, stone columns, an entire architectural complex too precise, too deliberate to be natural. Artifacts of gold, ceramics, and carved stone were recovered, many bearing hallmarks of the Tiwanaku culture, a powerful civilization that flourished near the lake long before the Inca rose to power. Preliminary analysis suggests the submerged site could be 1,000 to 1,500 years old, matching Tiwanaku's golden age. This raises a pressing question. Was this the remains of a once dry city, later engulfed by rising water levels? Or was it a ceremonial center intentionally built at the edge of the lake to commune with the divine? And if it was once a living city, what caused it to disappear? An earthquake, geological shift, or a climatic change we've yet to document? Lake Titicaca is not just a body of water. To the Inca and their predecessors, it was a cosmic axis, a place where the boundaries between the physical and spiritual dissolved. Excavations on the island of the Moon and the island of the Sun, Titicaca's largest islands, have revealed temples, astronomical pillars, and sacred pathways where people once believed gods were born. Rituals were held here. Stones were aligned with solstices and sunsets. And across its islands, the very act of walking seemed symbolic of spiritual rebirth. Water here wasn't just matter, it was a conduit for the soul's return to its origin. The discovery of submerged architecture opens up an even larger possibility that before the lake took its current shape, this region may have been a dry valley, settled, structured, and sanctified, Then something happened. Slowly or suddenly water rose, and just like the forest cities of the Amazon or the lost city of Z, the people left. The city fell into legend, the structures were forgotten, but the lake remained, and over time, people no longer remembered the name of the city, only the place, not who built it, but who appeared there. Some researchers go even further, suggesting that a pre-Tiwanaku civilization, still barely understood, may have developed advanced stoneworking techniques before the Inca. That Titicaca was not a peripheral site, but a spiritual epicenter. The massive stones, the aligned altars, the ceremonial platforms, they hint at a time when this lake was the heart, not the edge, of ancient civilization. The Inca, with all their grandeur, may have been inheritors, not originators. Lake Titicaca, with its sacred stillness, may be concealing a deeper layer of memory, a civilization that chose water not to hide its legacy but to record it. And when we gaze into its surface, what reflects back is not just sky and cloud, but the inability of modern history to decode a past that refuses to be spoken aloud. And if cities lie buried beneath the lake, then above ground, the Inca left us another kind of language, a form of communication that didn't use stone or script, but thread, knots, and rhythm. The quipu, a mathematical code of memory, is where we now turn, a chapter deeper, still in the mind of the Andes. When the Spanish first arrived in the Inca Empire in the 16th century, they were stunned. Here was a vast, highly organized civilization stretching across thousands of kilometers, functioning with clockwork precision, and yet without writing, no scrolls, no stone inscriptions, no letters. And still, storehouses were stocked and redistributed efficiently. Roads were maintained across impossible terrain. Populations were tracked household by household. What left the conquistadors speechless was the Inca's central instrument of administration, bundles of knotted cords known as quipu. At first glance, a quipu looks like a simple cluster of strings, but in reality, it was one of the most complex information systems ever developed in the pre-Columbian Americas. A form of unwritten language powerful enough to store history, census data, and even spiritual concepts. In Quechua, quipu means knot. Each one consists of a main cord with multiple pendant strings, each tied with specific knots. The position, spacing, type of knot, thread color, and even direction of twist all held meaning. Modern research has shown that many quipu recorded numeric data, population counts, taxes, harvest yields, dates, shipments, using a decimal-based structure capable of representing numbers in the tens of thousands. The accuracy of these figures, which could be cross-checked across different regions, points to the existence of a professional class called quipu kamayuk, the knot readers. These individuals were trained to encode and decode the information in quipu, much like silent scribes. But quipu weren't just ledgers. Some scholars now believe many preserved quipu contain non-numeric data, history, mythology, laws, rituals. These undeciphered quipu often feature intricate, non-repetitive knot patterns, along with symbolic color arrangements. Some even form spiral or lattice-like configurations, prompting an unsettling question. Did the Inca possess a full-fledged written language, one not built on symbols or speech, but on rhythm, touch, and memory? In a world where reading is mostly visual, quipu flipped the script. The Inca read with their hands. The quipu kamayuk could run their fingers along the knots, feeling the twist, the tension, the placement, decoding information not through sight or sound, but through tactile memory. It required not only mathematical precision, but deep sensory awareness. Maybe, to the Inca, even ideas could be tied. One intriguing hypothesis is that quipu were once repositories of national history. In the 17th century, chronicler Waman Poma recorded that elders could recount their ancestors' stories across many generations just by running their fingers along the strings. If that's true, then we're looking at a sophisticated system of communal memory, where stories weren't spoken aloud but passed hand to hand like a silent melody only those who knew it could hum. Hundreds of quipu have survived, stored in museums and archives around the world, but their full meanings remain hidden. After the conquest, the last quipu Kamayuk disappeared, and with them the keys to a code that may have carried the soul of an entire civilization. The Spanish, unable to understand the chords, saw them as witchcraft. They destroyed thousands, severing a living information stream we may never fully recover. Yet today, researchers are turning to artificial intelligence to scan knot patterns, detect statistical correlations, and cross-reference quipu with known historical events, hoping that someday these ancient chords might speak again, not in words, but in the rhythm of memory. Because sometimes history isn't written in books. It's knotted into a string, tied hundreds of years ago, waiting for patient hands to trace it back. And while the Inca encoded memory in thread, the memory of the ancient world may also lie in maps, strange, inexplicable maps that show lands no one was supposed to know. So who drew them? And did someone reach the Americas long before Columbus? In the old libraries of Europe, tucked inside faded parchment and weather-stained leather, there are maps that make modern history shift uncomfortably. Not because they're vague or mythical, but because they're terrifyingly precise. Coastlines traced with uncanny accuracy, islands placed where they should be, and most unsettling of all, depictions of lands that weren't officially discovered for centuries after the maps were drawn. How could a map from the 15th century or earlier so accurately portray the Americas, Antarctica, or the Pacific coast long before Western explorers ever reached those places? At some point, the question becomes not who drew the maps, but who got there before we thought anyone could. Among the most famous is the Piri Reis map, created in 1513 by the Ottoman admiral of the same name. It includes detailed depictions of Europe, North Africa, and most notably, a startlingly accurate outline of the eastern coast of South America. But the real mystery lies farther south, a segment many believe represents the northern shore of Antarctica, not covered in ice, but showing the bare landmass underneath. How could someone in the early 1500s have known the shape of a continent buried beneath miles of glacial ice? Piri Reis himself wrote in the map's annotations that he did not create it from scratch. He compiled it from about 20 older maps, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great. Those original documents are lost, but the existence of the Piri Reis map alone fuels a compelling idea that a global maritime knowledge system may have existed long before Columbus and long before the medieval world ever admitted such a thing was possible. Other maps add to the mystery: the Oronsa Fine map from 1531, the Zeno map from 1380, and the controversial Vinland map, which depicts parts of North America and Greenland before Columbus ever set sail, all point to a shadow world of cartographic knowledge. One where the mapmakers may have relied not just on official expeditions, but on sources now lost: Phoenician traders, Chinese navigators, or civilizations we have yet to name. In Asia, the Korean Kangnido map from 1402 depicts Africa with stunning detail, centuries before Europeans had mapped it accurately. In China, records from the Ming dynasty describe Admiral Zheng He's voyages far beyond Asia, reaching Africa, the Middle East, and perhaps, according to some theories, even the Americas. Some scholars argue that Chinese sailors may have recorded geographic knowledge far more extensive than the history books let on, but wars, politics, or imperial collapse may have buried their maps forever. Even the Inca and Maya had symbolic images in their codices, drawings of boats, winds, and possible migrations from the east. These aren't yet conclusive, but they hint at a larger memory, an ancient awareness of oceanic movement that modern interpretation has failed to recognize. The idea that indigenous peoples of the Americas remembered, in myth or symbol, the arrival of outsiders before Columbus is not as far-fetched as once believed. All of this raises a question we rarely ask. Was 1492 truly the first discovery of the Americas? Or was it simply the moment that Europe wrote it down? If the Vikings reached Vinland, if Polynesians crossed the Pacific to South America, if Chinese fleets sailed to foreign shores, and if indigenous peoples once remembered strangers coming from the East, then perhaps discovery is the wrong word. Entirely, perhaps it's time we speak of it with more humility. Ancient maps don't argue, they don't try to persuade, they just show us what was seen, measured and recorded, even if no one was listening. They are whispers from another time, dusted off by a modern world just beginning to realize how much it's forgotten. And if pre-European civilizations truly reached the Americas, then how did they cross? What routes did they take? And why did history choose to forget them? Scattered across the continent are artifacts, Asian-style ceramics along the Pacific, African-like carvings deep in South America that feel like ghost echoes of ancient contact, encounters that may have happened but were buried under centuries of war, silence and doubt. Not every ancient journey was a myth. Even if we set aside the grand theories and sweeping speculation, one fact remains impossible to ignore. Long before the age of Columbus, small Viking ships had already crossed the Atlantic. They reached Newfoundland. They built wooden houses in the wilds of the Western world. No precise maps, no modern navigation, just the sky, the sea, and an unwavering spirit of exploration. They came and they left, writing a chapter of history that rarely appears in textbooks, as if someone had quietly closed the door behind them, but what they left behind in the earth, in the stone, and in indigenous memory still whispers the story of a journey not of conquest but of courageous curiosity. That story is no longer legend. On the northern tip of Newfoundland, Canada, there's a place called L'Anse-aux-Meadows. In the 1960s, archaeologists unearthed the remains of an ancient European settlement there. The structures, ironworking tools, and unmistakably Norse artifacts told a clear story. This was a Viking camp dating to the late 10th century. The blacksmithing, the architectural style, even the type of wood matched those found in Viking settlements in Greenland and Iceland. There is no longer any doubt Vikings lived, worked, and built on North American soil, even if only briefly. The roots of this expedition lie in the Norse sagas, epic tales passed down in Icelandic tradition. According to the saga of Eric the Red and the saga of the Greenlanders, Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red, sailed west from Greenland and reached a fertile land he called Vinland, named for the wild grapes found there. The stories describe green landscapes, abundant resources, and encounters with indigenous peoples, whom they called the Skraelings. For years, historians dismissed the Vinland sagas as myth, heroic embellishments meant to glorify Norse bravery. But the discovery at L'Anse-aux-Meadows changed that. It not only confirmed the Vikings had reached the Americas, it suggested they may have explored farther. Some wood found at the site came from regions farther south, where birch trees, common in Greenland, do not grow, meaning they travelled inland or along the coast. Could Vinland have been more than just a small outpost? Was it part of a longer, more complex journey? So why didn't the Vikings stay? According to the sagas, conflicts with locals, the vast distance from home, and the isolation made permanent settlement unsustainable. Perhaps they never intended to conquer. They came, they explored, they tested their limits, and when those limits pushed back, they left. All that remained were scattered memories, drifting in the northern wind. What's telling is that Vinland never appeared on medieval European maps. Leif Erikson's journey didn't change the world the way Columbus's would centuries later. The Vikings carried no empire with them. They started no colonies. They didn't write history in blood. They wrote it in timber, fire, and quiet footsteps on foreign soil. And then they were forgotten. But today, as we recover rusted nails, carved wooden pins, and fragments of ancient epics, a quiet truth begins to emerge. History doesn't move in a straight line. It's a tangled web where forgotten voyages may have shifted the human story long before anyone wrote down the name of a continent. If the Vikings reached North America, perhaps they were just one of many. Maybe there were other crossings, other meetings lost in the shadows of time. So when we find shards of Asian pottery on the California coast, or statues with African features in South America dismissed as coincidence, we might ask instead, what if they're echoes of contact, glimpses of cultural exchange that history didn't make room for? Because if intercontinental contact happened before Columbus, then what we've been taught as the discovery of the Americas was not a beginning, but a continuation. And the out-of-place artifacts, the ones that didn't fit the official timeline, might be the last surviving evidence of ancient migrations, forgotten trade routes, or old-world explorers who were never written into the Western story. Not because they were never here, but because no one wanted to believe they were. We now stand at the threshold where the forgotten fragments of history might just come together to reveal an entirely new picture. The question is no longer whether ancient people could cross oceans. It's who did it? When? And why don't we know about it? In museums, archives, and archaeological sites across the world, there may still be isolated artifacts, their true significance unrecognized, stones etched with unknown writing, alloys that don't match their supposed era, art styles foreign to their region. Each item is a whisper, a clue, and if we're willing to listen, we might begin to see that human history wasn't a straight line of progress, but a complex tapestry, interwoven, overlapping, and far more intricate than we've been taught to believe. One of the most controversial starting points lies in a set of ancient mummies. In the 1990s, German researchers discovered traces of tobacco and cocaine, plants native only to the Americas, in the hair of an Egyptian priestess named Henut Tawi, dated to over 3,000 years ago. Multiple tests confirmed the result. If this wasn't contamination, there's only one explanation. Substances from the Americas reached Egypt in the ancient world. But how? No one could say. And instead of further inquiry, many scholars dismissed it outright, not because it was disproven, but because it couldn't be true. In Veracruz, Mexico, the Olmec left behind giant stone heads, many with facial features that don't resemble the indigenous peoples of the region. Wide noses, full lips, traits that resemble West Africans more than Mesoamericans. Could it be coincidence? Perhaps. But the repetition across multiple sculptures has led some independent researchers to suggest ancient contact across the Atlantic, following currents like the Canary and North Equatorial, which modern reconstructions have shown could be navigated using ancient technology. Expeditions like Thor Heyerdahl's Ra-2 proved the ocean could be crossed by reed boat. So why not then? On the other side of the Pacific, pottery found in California and British Columbia bears decorations strikingly similar to ancient East Asian styles. Some indigenous oral traditions speak of black-haired visitors or people who came from across the sea in the west. Near Ecuador, archaeologists discovered ceramics nearly identical in form and firing technique to the 5,000-year-old Jomon pottery of Japan. Could it be that early Japanese mariners were blown across the Pacific by the powerful Kuroshio current? Oceanic drift has done stranger things. The more important question isn't did all ancient cultures meet, it's Are we ignoring the evidence because it doesn't fit our historical framework? Cultural contact doesn't require empires. It doesn't need written records. It might survive in soil composition, farming methods, beadwork, masks, religious symbols, or quiet oral traditions passed down in half-remembered legends. Even ancient texts hint at these possibilities. Indian epics and Tang dynasty Chinese records contain vague but curious descriptions of lands across the ocean, populated by reddish-skinned people who grew maize. These stories have long been dismissed as metaphor. But in light of the many overlooked discoveries, perhaps it's time we read them with less skepticism and more curiosity. Of course, much of this remains unconfirmed. The puzzle is incomplete. But if we stop rejecting what doesn't fit and instead allow space for what might be, then a new picture starts to emerge, a picture of a global ancient world, open, connected, exploratory, where oceans weren't walls, they were bridges. And if that's true, then even the most controversial theory, the idea that prehistoric Europeans might have reached the Americas during the Ice Age, isn't as outlandish as it sounds. The Solutrean hypothesis, fiercely debated and often dismissed, deserves a closer look. Could Stone Age hunters from Europe have crossed the ice and reached the New World more than 20,000 years ago? That's where we go next. The Solutrean hypothesis takes its name from the Solutrean culture of Western Europe, which existed roughly 22,000 to 17,000 years ago in what is now France and Spain. The Solutreans are known for their remarkably refined stone tools, especially long, thin, symmetrical blades crafted with a technique that shows an astonishing level of precision and planning. These tools bear an uncanny resemblance to those of the Clovis culture in North America, long thought to represent the continent's first human presence around 13,000 years ago. It's that similarity in tool-making, particularly the use of fluting, a grooved channel carved along the center of a blade, that stands at the core of the Solutrean hypothesis. Proponents argue that during the last glacial maximum, humans could have followed ice flows along the edge of the Atlantic, migrating from the coasts of Ice Age Europe to what is now eastern Canada. They may have hunted seals, fish, and seabirds along the frozen frontier, traveling in wooden boats or hide-covered rafts. With sea levels much lower than today, the crossing would have been several hundred kilometers shorter. Skeptics point out that no conclusive genetic evidence has confirmed a European origin in the DNA of Native Americans, but in 2014, a genetic study of a 12,600-year-old boy from Montana, known as Anzic I, revealed a complex ancestral lineage, one that included not only East Asian markers but also a branch loosely related to ancient European populations. Some researchers noted genetic links between Anzic I and Upper Paleolithic cultures in Europe, such as the Gravettian and Aurignacian. Beyond tools and DNA, archaeology offers a few more threads of intrigue. At Chesapeake Bay, researchers uncovered a stone tool embedded in a sediment layer more than 20,000 years old, far older than any known Clovis site. And the tool itself, crafted in a Solutrean style, it wasn't dropped there recently. So how did it get there? There's still no consensus, but the reaction to this hypothesis is telling. While the Bering Strait migration theory is widely accepted despite similarly limited physical evidence, the Solutrean theory is often met with swift rejection. Perhaps it's because it disrupts a long-held narrative, a neat, linear history of the Americas. It raises uncomfortable questions. If Europeans crossed the Atlantic millennia before Columbus, what does that mean for our concepts of discovery, identity, and power? What if the truth has been buried not by time, but by convenience? But the Solutrean hypothesis doesn't have to be definitive to be valuable. Its real contribution is this: it challenges the limits of what we consider possible. Ancient civilizations didn't leave behind photos or maps. They left behind tools, stories whispered across generations, and stones that seem to be out of place, yet may point to a chapter of history never written in ink, only in earth. If prehistoric Europeans once followed the ice to the eastern shores of North America, then their legacy, however brief, may still echo. In a stone blade, in a strand of DNA caught between two worlds. Or perhaps in a Native American myth about pale-skinned visitors who came from the east, walked into the forests and left their spirits behind in the rocks and soil. And if the Solitarian hypothesis is even possible, then the story of the Americas wasn't born in isolation. It may have been a meeting point where lines from Asia, Europe, Africa, and perhaps even lands yet unnamed, all converged for a moment in time. These encounters, brief or sustained, may have influenced not just tools, but technologies, beliefs, and ways of life. And from these unresolved fragments, a new image of the past begins to emerge. A past not defined by a straight timeline, but branching out into paths we never acknowledged. Lost technologies may not have vanished simply due to time or war. They may be the remnants of ancient knowledge that once touched extraordinary heights, before collapsing under the weight of time. Because if ancient peoples could forge alloys that defy rust, manipulate metals to permanently change color without paint, and craft jewelry so fine it blurs the line between handmade and machined, then maybe, just maybe, they knew far more than we've ever allowed ourselves to believe. High in the clouds, among ancient tombs, buried temples, and stone settlements clinging to the Andean slopes, archaeologists have uncovered metal artifacts whose methods of manufacture remain, even today, largely unexplained. No written records, no surviving foundries, only the objects themselves remain, silent messages from a culture that didn't need writing because their craftsmanship was the language, a language of metal, of shimmering light, and of precision bordering on the metaphysical. If this is true, then the ancient world may have been connected not just through trade or warfare, but through knowledge, a hidden current of wisdom that flowed across oceans, outpacing geography and time. A network that carried technologies we still struggle to replicate, much less explain. In Peru, Bolivia, and Ecuador, metal artifacts crafted from bronze, arsenic alloys, gold, and silver have been unearthed from cultures that predated the Inca, the Moche, Chimu, Nazca, and especially Tiwanaku. These ancient metallurgists weren't just melting and pouring metal. They mastered techniques for soldering, lamination, alloy layering, and even surface treatments that changed the color and function of metal used in rituals, adornment, and symbolic architecture. The precision of their alloy ratios, the uniform thinness of metal sheets, and the strength of their gilding suggests they controlled heat and chemical reactions at a level that modern science still can't fully reconstruct, despite lacking sealed kilns or thermal gauges. One of their most sophisticated methods was tumbaga, an alloy of gold and copper treated with organic acids, possibly from fermented juice or plant sap, to dissolve surface copper and leave behind a golden finish. The result? Objects that appeared to be pure gold but were in fact plated, essentially an ancient form of electroplating. Did the Moche or Chimu understand redox reactions and surface chemistry? They left no formulas, but the objects themselves are the only proof we need. They knew what they were doing. Perhaps most baffling are the sound instruments, metal trumpets, resonant tubes, and golden masks designed with precise acoustic properties. Some copper tubes found near Nazca and Lake Titicaca are shaped like modern brass instruments, seamless with internal diameters that vary in accordance with acoustic principles. They were not decorative, they were functional. Someone understood how sound waves worked. But who taught them that? Then there are the gold figurines of the Chimu and Moche, birds, people, animals, crafted with filigree so delicate that light passes through, or with moving joints like primitive clockwork. Some bangles had hidden hinges, some masks fit perfectly to the human face. Certain forms display spiral and polyhedral symmetry, suggesting not just artistry, but an understanding of geometric and mechanical structure. But the real mystery isn't in the object, it's in the process. The Inca had no bellows, no foot-pumped furnaces, no metal rollers like Mesopotamia or China. So how did they reach the necessary heat to melt arsenic-bronze alloys upwards of 900 degrees Celsius? One theory posits that they harnessed natural wind tunnels, building their furnaces in mountain passes where constant strong winds stoked the flames. At high-altitude sites in the Andes, shards of ceramic have been found scorched at over 1,000 degrees Celsius, proof that they didn't fight nature, they engineered with it. Climate, terrain, and air became allies, not limitations. In La Libertad, Peru, archaeologists found metal foils beaten so thin they were nearly transparent, used to cover stone temple walls. When sunlight hit, it reflected in waves, making the entire surface appear to glow, a visual effect eerily similar to modern symbolic lighting in sacred architecture. They didn't just understand that metal reflects light. They understood how to use light to convey the sacred. So the question isn't just, how did they do this, but why don't we know they ever did? Perhaps it's because these techniques weren't used for war, conquest, or industrialization, so they weren't remembered by European chroniclers. But in a world where intricacy is often overshadowed by scale, the Inca and their predecessors may have crafted a different kind of technology, what we might call spiritual engineering, a place where metallurgy wasn't just functional, but a medium of devotion where metal served not the hand, but the soul. And if they mastered metal, acoustics, and light, maybe they mastered water and soil too. The ancient irrigation systems, the sustainable agriculture carved into mountainsides, the environmental engineering that lasted for centuries, all wait to be rediscovered. A reminder that not all technology needs to be invented. Some of it only needs to be remembered. Across the steep mountainsides, the dizzying valleys, and the wind-swept highlands of prehistoric America, something quietly magnificent once unfolded. Ancient people didn't just survive the harshness of nature, they reshaped it. They didn't fight the terrain, they adapted to it. They didn't force crops into stubborn ground. They learned how to invite rain, guide water, and coax maize, potatoes, and roots from earth that modern farmers might deem impossible. When researchers began carefully studying the faint traces left in the soil, they realized something astonishing. Ancient American agriculture was not primitive. It was sophisticated, it was planned, it was sustainable, and it mirrored an ecological philosophy that modern agriculture is now desperately trying to recover. In the Andes, where steep slopes and unpredictable weather dominate the land, the Inca and their predecessors developed the andanes, stone terraces that cascade down mountainsides like stairways of life. These terraces didn't just prevent erosion, they created microclimates. Upper levels were warm and dry, perfect for drought-resistant crops. Lower levels retained moisture, ideal for water-loving plants. Without greenhouses or air conditioning, they created ecological diversity on a single hill. Their water channels, reservoirs, and stone drainage systems still function today, as if nature had agreed long ago to cooperate with the people who lived there. Near Cusco lies one of the most unique agricultural monuments on Earth, Moray, a giant circular depression carved into the landscape with tiered rings descending like a spiral funnel. The temperature difference from top to bottom can exceed 5 degrees Celsius, enough to simulate entirely different growing zones. Scientists now believe Moray was an ecological laboratory, where the Inca tested crops and studied growing conditions before deploying them across the empire. Could it be that ancient people understood hybridization, propagation, and yield optimization, not through theory, but through centuries of observation? If so, then this wasn't slash and burn subsistence farming, this was agricultural science. In the Amazon, just as we explored earlier, an entire forest civilization engineered terra preta, or Black Earth. It's a super fertile, human-made soil composed of charcoal, ash, compost, and microorganisms created deliberately over generations. And it doesn't degrade, in fact, it regenerates. In a world where modern farmland is losing fertility, ancient terra preta can still nourish plants after thousands of years. In the lake basins of Mexico, the Aztecs created the chinampas, floating gardens formed from woven branches, layered with rich mud, and anchored into shallow lake beds. These islands not only saved space, they were hyper-productive, fed constantly from the water below. The canals between them formed a lush, agricultural Venice. At its peak, Tenochtitlan could feed hundreds of thousands of people from this system, something even modern cities struggle to achieve without heavy machinery and chemicals. What's most striking is the unity between agriculture and belief. Irrigation wasn't just about feeding crops, it mirrored cosmology. At Tipon in Peru, sacred water channels split into 3 streams, one symbolizing the heavens, one the earth, one the underworld, uniting the cosmos in a literal and symbolic flow. Water wasn't just a resource, it was a soul. And it wasn't controlled, it was guided, gently, respectfully. Today, as we face ecological collapse, depleted soil and dwindling water, these ancient systems feel less like relics and more like revelations. Not to be copied exactly, but to be learned from. They teach long-term thinking. They show how biology, geography, and spirituality can work together. These people didn't farm for a season. They farmed in harmony with the land for generations, and if they could do that, if they could coax fertility from rock and resilience from rain, then who's to say they couldn't build cities that still defy our understanding, cities we've yet to rediscover, cities that may lie beneath the ocean, buried not by myth, but by time. So the question arises, did they build them? Are there sunken cities beneath waves, silt, and silence, waiting to tell us what the mountains already have? When we think of ancient cities, we often imagine temples on mountaintops, pyramids in jungles, or crumbling stone ruins exposed under the desert sun. But there is another kind of city, dreamlike, floating beneath crystal-clear waters, hidden beneath lakes, buried deep inside cave systems, or offshore in the turquoise seas of the Caribbean. These are the sunken cities of the Maya, not myths like Atlantis, but real, verifiable archaeology, now emerging through modern technology and the patience of a new generation of explorers. And they ask a chilling, electrifying question. Did the Maya live, build, and worship within the water itself? Or was water the sacred memory to which they entrusted a part of their civilization? The Yucatan Peninsula is home to the largest known network of underground caves on Earth, where natural sinkholes called cenotes are not just sources of water, but portals to the divine. As archaeologists began diving into the deepest cenotes and following their submerged channels, they didn't just find bones and offerings. They found architecture, stone walls, stairways, columns, and even submerged temples lost in the shadows of water. In the Sac Actun system, one of the longest flooded cave networks in the world, Mexican and international researchers discovered stone altars, ceremonial items, miniature deity statues, and scorched surfaces that show signs of ritual fire. In a place where sunlight never reaches, the Maya lit flames, held sacred rites, and left pieces of their culture behind in the darkness of rock and water. This was not accidental. It may have been intentional descent into the underworld, Xibalba, a realm of trials and transformation where the soul was reborn through sacred passage. One of the most striking discoveries came at Cenote Holtun near Chichen Itza. Geophysical radar detected a large, hollow space directly beneath the El Castillo pyramid. Later surveys revealed a vast water-filled cave system, long hidden but possibly known to the ancients. This has led to a compelling theory that El Castillo was not just placed at random but built directly atop a sacred axis where sky, earth, and water met. A pyramid on a cenote is not architecture, it's cosmology in stone. In Quintana Roo, ancient tombs with human remains were found underwater in Hoyo Negro, a vast cave chamber. Some of the skeletons date back over 12,000 years to the pre-Maya era. This suggests that many of these cave systems were once dry land, used for living, hiding, or worship over millennia. As the Ice Age ended and sea levels rose, those sanctuaries flooded. Cities, shrines, stairways, all swallowed into a submerged cultural memory. But the Maya did not fear water. They lived with it. They integrated it into ritual, architecture, and religion. Stone walls were built intentionally submerged to create shimmering effects. Some tunnels beneath pyramids lead directly to hidden lakes. Great cities like Calakmul and Tikal featured massive artificial reservoirs, not just to store water, but arranged as sacred mirrors reflecting the stars and the Maya cosmos itself. So why were these underwater cities forgotten? It could have been climate change, geological upheaval, or perhaps, as Maya mythology suggests, sacred places are reclaimed by water once their divine purpose is fulfilled, so that the boundary between worlds remains pure. And so, beneath each quiet cenote, beneath every still pool of ancient water, there may lie a silent library that has never been read. Each sunken column, algae-covered step, or shattered ceremonial pot may be a letter in a Maya chronicle, dissolving beneath the weight of time. But if we're patient, if we learn to listen, and if we can accept that history might be written not in stone, but in water, then these cities may still have something to say. Yet the mystery of submerged ruins doesn't belong to the Maya alone. Off the coasts of the Caribbean, beneath waves and far from any settlement, lie stone formations that seem architectural, too precise, too aligned, too deliberate to be natural. Are these the remains of a forgotten prehistoric civilization? Or could they be the evidence of a historical chapter purposefully erased from the collective memory? For over 2,000 years, the story of Atlantis has hovered like a mist over humanity's dreams and doubts, a civilization of immense wealth, wisdom, and power destroyed in a single, fateful night. First, told by Plato in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias in the 4th century BCE, Atlantis was described as a great island beyond the Pillars of Heracles, beyond the Strait of Gibraltar, whose people lived in a city of concentric rings, adorned in gold, crossed by vast canals, and built upon a foundation of advanced knowledge. It was not just a place, it was a warning, a symbol of prosperity consumed by arrogance, and of what happens when a society falls out of balance with the natural world. But what's even more surprising is that as we study the ancient civilizations of the Americas, Maya, Inca, Olmec, we begin to hear strange echoes of Atlantis. Not in the coordinates, but in the symbolism. Cities designed with concentric layouts, like Cuenca in Ecuador or Motul in Mexico. Elaborate canal systems and spiraling waterworks in Corral and the Amazon. Megalithic walls with seamless joins at Sacsayhuaman and Pumapunku. It's as if the shadow of Atlantis, real or imagined, drifted through these pre-Columbian cultures like a fragmented ancestral memory. A controversial but deeply compelling theory suggests that Atlantis wasn't beneath the Mediterranean at all, but was, in fact, the pre-Columbian Americas. a vast land across the Atlantic that the Egyptians, Phoenicians, or an even earlier civilization may have once known. Some independent researchers point to maps like the Piri-Reis map and cryptic references in ancient texts to argue that the Americas were known long before Columbus, but that this knowledge was lost, hidden, or erased by secret societies, collapsed empires, or deliberate revision. Plato's own description speaks of Atlantis as larger than Libya and Asia combined, a size that fits no island but does fit a continent. He wrote that from Atlantis you could travel to other islands and from them to a whole continent on the opposite shore. Some now wonder if this wasn't metaphor, but a literal reference to the Western Hemisphere, seen through ancient eyes and long-forgotten voyages. In 2001, this theory gained new intrigue when a joint Canadian-Cuban team used sonar to scan the sea floor off the coast of Cuba. At a depth of over 600 meters, they detected geometric structures, straight lines, right angles, rectangular forms that resembled sunken pyramids or city grids. No excavation has confirmed their nature, but the images sparked renewed speculation. Could an ancient city have sunk here due to a sudden geological shift, an earthquake, a landslide, or post-glacial sea rise? If a civilization once stood there, between Yucatan and Cuba, then the real question isn't was it Atlantis, but why were we never taught it was possible? Maybe Atlantis isn't a place, but a memory, a collective echo of ancient cities lost, not just to disaster, but to silence. Atlantis might be Corral, older than Egypt. It might be El Mirador, an empire devoured by jungle. It might be the Amazonian civilization, erased by disease and time. Or perhaps it's the greatest metaphor history has ever given us, for everything we've allowed to sink below the surface, now flickering back to life as science begins to shine its light into the deep. And even if Atlantis is only a symbol, that doesn't make it less real, because buried in human memory is the longing for a lost ideal, a perfect city swallowed by time, and the endless need to find it again. If the sea still holds unnamed structures, then the last chapter of this mystery may lie beneath our very feet, in the Caribbean, where modern archaeology is only just beginning to touch the ruins that were never written into our textbooks. Not only in Cuba. Off the coast of the Bahamas, especially near Bimini Island, there's a formation known as the Bimini Road, first documented in 1968. It's a long half-kilometer stretch of rectangular stones laid out like an ancient causeway. The blocks are flat, aligned, and fit closely together, too precisely, some argue, to be a product of nature alone. While some geologists insist it's the result of natural erosion, independent archaeologists have pushed back. They point to signs of cutting, shaping, smoothing, angles too deliberate, orientations too uniform to be purely geological coincidence. Further out, near Andros Island, the Caicos Reef, and the deep waters of the Bay of Campeche, sonar scans have picked up strange anomalies, submerged geometric structures buried beneath the sea. These formations haven't been physically reached yet, but what sonar shows is enough to raise eyebrows. Symmetry, layout, and alignment that suggest intelligent design, not chaos. Could these be the remains of an ancient coastal network built before rising sea levels swallowed entire shorelines at the end of the last ice age? Some bolder hypotheses go further. They suggest the Caribbean Sea was once a cultural hub, connecting early civilizations across the Americas, Africa, and even parts of Europe. When continents were closer and ocean currents more favorable, ancient mariners may have crossed these waters, stopping at ceremonial ports, resting at sacred stations, or building cities that now lie drowned beneath rising tides. If so, these ruins don't just push back the timeline of history in the region, they expand our understanding of how far prehistoric civilizations could reach and how interconnected they may have been. But perhaps the most haunting part of this mystery is the silence that followed. After the initial reports, many deep-sea archaeological projects stalled, delayed, defunded, or quietly ignored. Some independent researchers believe there's a deep, unspoken hesitation in accepting that history might have started earlier, wider, and stranger than we've been taught. The idea of a nameless civilization, one that left no written records but may have left stones resting silently on the ocean floor, is still too radical for many to embrace. And if these submerged cities in the Caribbean are real, perhaps they aren't anomalies at all. Perhaps they are only the sunken edge of a much larger iceberg whose visible tip is the abandoned cities we've already found inland, the pyramids in the jungle, the megaliths on mountaintops, the earthen mounds across North America. Maybe, just maybe, the sea swallowed the same kinds of places we now struggle to explain on dry land. So we end this chapter with a wider view. If multiple civilizations once existed in parallel, could there have been a connection between them? Could the sunken cities, the mountaintop temples, the forest pyramids, and the animal-shaped mounds of the north have been more than isolated marvels? What if they were points in a vast mental map, a spiritual network, an architecture of consciousness that spanned continents and epochs? Not one civilization, but many, connected not by empire, but by something deeper, a shared understanding of earth, sky, time, and the soul. And if such a network existed, its remnants may still be speaking, not through language, but through alignment, stone, silence, and the patient eyes of those willing to see. When we look into the past, what unsettles us isn't just what has been forgotten, it's what has always been there, right before our eyes, yet never truly seen. Time after time, a stone structure is uncovered with impossible precision. An artifact surfaces from a geological layer that defies its age. An ancient map reveals lands undiscovered until centuries later. Each one feels like an out-of-place puzzle piece, leftover fragments from a historical picture we may have framed far too early. And each time, the response is rarely curiosity or dialogue. More often, it's a long silence, or a quiet, dismissive frown. That can't be. Within the architecture of modern knowledge, some assumptions have become so foundational they're no longer questioned. And in that stability, contradictions get filed away, labeled as anomalies, outliers, things that don't quite matter. Discoveries that could reshape our understanding of civilization's beginnings are dismissed as unsupported, outside the system, or simply irrelevant. No grand conspiracy is needed. Sometimes the quiet comfort of keeping things in order is enough to keep the extraordinary from ever becoming part of the official story. Of course, not everyone in the academic world turns their back on the unknown, but many voices choose silence, not because the evidence isn't there, but because of what it might cost: reputation, funding, belonging. When truth becomes conditional on academic safety, then even truth itself struggles to be heard. That's why the question isn't who's hiding history, it's have we truly listened to what history has been trying to say? Because more often than not, the past isn't buried, it's just seen through eyes unwilling to change. And if what was once labeled fringe, odd, or irrelevant turns out to be the missing piece of a greater puzzle, then maybe it's time to look again. Not to rewrite history with anger, but to give it depth. To accept that truth doesn't always live in the spotlight. Sometimes it hides in quiet cracks, waiting for those who are still enough to hear it. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this journey. May these forgotten echoes whether buried by time or dulled by disbelief, still find a way to reach the present through the hearts of those willing to listen. I wish you a peaceful night and dreams filled with the kind of past that never truly disappeared, only waited to be remembered. Sleep well.